Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto is summoned to fairy tale for breeding with Erza and Mirajane? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. A sun in a foreign sky. The air in the chasm beneath the headquarters of the Magic Council was colder than a grave and tasted of ozone and old stone. It was a place designed to be forgotten, a deep wound in the bedrock of Earthland where secrets were kept and unforgivable things were done in the name of the greater good. Tonight, it was the stage for an act of cosmic larceny. At the center of the cavern floor, a magic circle of impossible complexity pulsed with a light that was not quite white, not quite gold, but the searing color of a star's heart. It sprawled 100 meters across, a filigree of runes so dense they seemed to melt into one another, each one a universe of arcane law and desperate hope. Makarov Drayar, master of the Fairy Tale Guild, stood at the perimeter, his small frame looking utterly insignificant before the spectacle. His hands, clasped behind his back, were knotted into fists so tight his knuckles were white. The light of the circle carved deep shadows into the lines on his face, making him look more ancient than his years. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him that this was wrong, a violation. But the alternative, the one whispered in the council's most terrified chambers, was annihilation. He had read the prophecies himself, seen the celestial charts that showed a void stain spreading at the edge of reality. He had made his choice, and the price was the souls of the two women standing beside him. To his right stood Erza Scarlet, a statue carved from duty and resolve. Clad in her simple heart crew's armor, she looked more like a knight about to keep a solemn vigil than a component in a world-altering ritual. Her scarlet hair was a slash of defiant color in the oppressive gloom. Her gaze was fixed on the swirling vortex of power at the circle's center, her expression unreadable. But Makarov knew her. He saw the microscopic tension in her jaw, the way her hand rested on the hilt of a sword that wasn't there. She had accepted this as a soldier accepts a mission from which they do not expect to return. It was for the good of the world. That was always enough for Erza. Today, Makarov wondered if that was a virtue or a tragedy. On his left, Mirajane Strauss was her perfect opposite. She wore a simple dress, her white hair a halo in the arcane glow. A serene, almost beatific smile graced her lips, the kind she offered to patrons at the guild bar. It was a lie, a beautiful, carefully constructed lie that Makarov had seen her use to mask a fury that could level mountains. Her hands were folded neatly before her, but her fingers were interlaced with a pressure that would snap bone. She saw this not as a duty, but as a cage being built around her. She had agreed, for her siblings, for the guild, for the world. But acceptance was not the same as surrender. The resonance is stabilizing, a high-pitched voice called out from a raised dais. A thin, reedy man in the formal robes of a council runesmith frantically adjusted a series of floating crystals. All conduits are green. Master Makarov, the final sequence requires your magical signature. Makarov took a slow, deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. And the containment teams, in position, another voice confirmed. This one belonging to Lahar of the Custody Enforcement Unit. He stood with a dozen of his best men, their anti-magic staves humming with latent power. They were arranged in a perfect tactical formation, ready to pacify a god if one should step through. The moment the entity arrives, we will secure it. Entity, secure it. The words were so clinical, so detached, as if they were discussing a rabid beast and not a person they were about to tear from their home. Do it, master, Erza said, her voice low and steady, betraying no hint of the turmoil he knew was inside her. Mirajane said nothing, but her smile tightened by a fraction. That was all the confirmation he needed. Makarov raised a hand. Golden light, warm and benevolent, the light of fairy tale itself, gathered in his palm. It felt obscene to use it for this. He pushed the feeling down and thrust his hand forward. The light shot into the circle like a meteor. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The low hum of the circle became a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the mountain. The light exploded outward, a concussive wave of pure energy that forced everyone to shield their eyes. The runes burned with incandescent fury, the lines of the circle no longer distinct but a solid, blazing sun that had somehow been born underground. The air itself seemed to thin, to stretch, as if reality was being pulled taut like a drum skin. Then, with a sound like the universe itself cracking open, the center of the circle collapsed into a vortex of impossible color and screaming energy. 1 second, Naruto Uzumaki was in the Hokage's office, arguing with Shikamaru over the logistics of a new trade agreement with the Land of Waves. The paperwork was a nightmare, and the GHT of another all-nighter was giving him a headache. The next, the world dissolved. It wasn't a teleportation. It wasn't a flicker of movement. It was a fundamental violation. He felt a hook latch onto his very existence. A pull that didn't affect his body but his soul. The scent of ink and old paper was replaced by the smell of lightning and dust. The quiet hum of Konoha was gone, replaced by a roar that vibrated through his bones. His vision blurred into a tunnel of shrieking light. He felt himself stretched thin, pulled through an opening that was far too small for a person to fit through. Kit, Kurama's voice boomed in his mind, the fox's immediate alarm a jolt of ice in his veins. Something is wrong. This isn't space-time ninjutsu. This is something else. Something raw. Naruto didn't need the warning. He was already reacting. His connection to the world, to the life force of the trees, the wind, the very earth beneath Konoha, was severed. It felt like a limb being torn off. In its place was a new energy. A chaotic and unfamiliar hum that saturated everything. He forced his senses open, pulling on the threads of natural energy in this new environment. It flooded him in an instant. Sage mode activated not with a thought, but with pure survival instinct. The orange pigmentation flared into existence around his eyes, his pupils sharpening into cross slits. The world snapped into focus with breathtaking clarity. He was standing in the center of a massive, glowing pattern etched into a stone floor. The light was fading now, the deafening roar receding to a low thrum. He was in a vast cavern. The ceiling lost in shadow far above. And he was surrounded. His senses, amplified 1,000-fold, painted a perfect picture for him. Dozens of life forces, all pulsing with that strange, foreign energy. Most were weak, flickering like candle flames in a storm. They were arranged in a ring around him, their emotions a cocktail of fear, aggression, and shock. They held long staves that hummed with a contained, dangerous power. Soldiers. 3 life forces, however, burned with an intensity that dwarfed the others. One was small, physically, but its energy signature was immense, a deep and ancient well of power. The man was old, worried, and radiating an authority that held the others in check. The second was a woman with scarlet hair. Her energy was sharp, focused, like a perfectly honed blade. It was contained, disciplined, but Naruto could feel the sheer pressure of it, a knight's indomitable will-given form. Her emotions were a tightly controlled mix of resolve and a deep, buried reluctance. The third, another woman with silver-white hair, was the most deceptive. Her energy felt calm on the surface, like a placid lake, but beneath it, Naruto sensed a maelstrom. A chaotic, demonic power was chained within her, raging against its restraints. Her surface emotion was a serene calm, but it was a mask for a cold, simmering fury. He registered it all in the space of a single heartbeat. His body was already moving, his mind processing threats and trajectories with the practiced ease of a man who had lived through a world war. He wasn't in Konoha. He wasn't even in his own world. He knew it with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the stone beneath his feet. "Secure the target," a voice yelled, sharp and commanding. The soldiers moved. They advanced in a practiced pincer formation, the tips of their staves glowing. Naruto didn't wait for them to close the distance. He dropped into a low crouch, his center of gravity sinking. The world slowed to a crawl. He saw the first soldier thrusting his staff forward, a bolt of purple energy coalescing at its tip. He saw the man to his left beginning a sweeping attack meant to cut off his retreat. He moved. He wasn't a flash of yellow light. He was just gone from where he had been. He appeared at the first soldier's side, his movements economical and precise. A single, sharp strike with the edge of his hand to the man's wrist. The staff clattered to the floor, its wielder grunting in pain, his hand numb. Before the man could even register the attack, Naruto had spun, using the soldier's own body as a shield against a bolt fired from across the circle. The energy sizzled against the man's armor, causing no real harm but adding to the chaos. Naruto flowed through their formation like water. He didn't use Rasengans or shadow clones. He didn't need to. This was pure, refined taijutsu, honed by sparring with Guyan Li, perfected in the crucible of war. A palm heel strike to a man's chest, perfectly placed to knock the wind out of him and send him stumbling back into his comrades. A sweeping leg kick that took out 2 soldiers at once. He grabbed a staff from a falling man, reversed it, and used the blunt end to expertly tap pressure points on 2 more, their bodies locking up and falling stiffly to the ground. It was over in less than 5 seconds. A dozen elite soldiers, neutralize. Without a single life-threatening injury. They lay groaning or unconscious, their perfect formation a complete shambles. The cavern was filled with a stunned, ringing silence. Naruto stood in the center of the mess he had made. The captured staff held loosely in one hand. He slowly scanned the remaining figures, his golden, toad-like eyes settling on the 3 powerful individuals who hadn't moved a muscle. He had their full attention. The old man's eyes were wide with disbelief. The scarlet-haired woman's hand was now gripping the air, her knuckles white. The white-haired woman's smile had vanished. Impressive, Kurama grumbled in his head. But now the real trouble starts. The kittens have claws, and they're about to come out. Naruto knew. He could feel the shift in the air, the pressure dropping as the 2 women decided he was not a target to be secured, but a threat to be confronted directly. Erza Scarlet acted first. Her face was a mask of grim determination. I had hoped this could be done without violence. A brilliant light enveloped her. It wasn't a jutsu, it was something else. A tangible manifestation of that sharp, bladed energy he had sensed. When the light faded a second later, her simple armor was gone. In its place was a suit of gleaming silver plate, adorned with large, angelic wings made of metal. And surrounding her, floating in the air in a perfect halo, were dozens upon dozens of swords of every shape and size, all humming with power, all pointed directly at him. The display was magnificent, a clear and undeniable show of force. Yet it was the Oman beside her that made the hairs on Naruto's arms stand up. Mirajane Strauss took a single step forward, and the very air around her seemed to curdle. The placid lake of her energy erupted into a tidal wave of darkness. A violet aura, thick and malevolent, exploded from her body. Her form twisted and changed, her simple dress shredding away as her skin turned a pale gray. Horns sprouted from the sides of her head, and large, bat-like wings ripped from her back. Her hands grew into wicked claws, and her eyes, once a gentle blue, now glowed a demonic red. The transformation was terrifying, a beautiful woman becoming a creature of nightmare in the blink of an eye. The power rolling off her was immense, chaotic, and hungry. So, this was their true strength. A knight who could summon an arsenal from thin air. And a demon of immense power. He tightened his grip on the captured staff. He had no desire to fight them. Fighting without understanding the stakes was a fool's game. But he wouldn't hesitate to defend himself. He had fought his whole life to be seen as more than a weapon, more than the monster sealed inside him. He would not be caged, not by anyone. He stood his ground, alone. Figure in a tattered black and orange jacket, facing down an angelic knight and a demonic queen. The sheer magical pressure they exerted was a physical force, pressing down on him, trying to make him kneel. But Naruto's own energy, the life force of the world flowing through him in sage mode, pushed back. It was a golden, vibrant aura, a stark contrast to the sharp silver of Erza's magic and the oppressive violet of Mirajane's. It was the energy of life itself, unyielding and unbreakable. The cavern became a pressure cooker of conflicting energies. The remaining council members, including Lahar, stumbled back, their faces pale. Even Makarov felt the strain, his own considerable power dwarfed by the silent war being waged in the center of the room. He had summoned a force of nature, and his 2 strongest daughters were trying to tame it. Erza's swords vibrated, eager to be loosed. "Surrender," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. "We do not wish to harm you." Mirajane, in her Satan soul form, spoke as well. Her voice a layered, ethereal whisper that scraped against the nerves. "It would be much less painful for you if you did as she says." Naruto remained silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between the 2 of them. He took in every detail. The way Erza stood, a perfect swordsman's stance, ready to unleash 100 blades at once. The way Mirajane floated just off the ground, her power coiling around her like a living thing. He wasn't afraid. He had stood before the 10 tails. He had traded blows with a goddess. This was manageable, but it was also a complete and utter waste of time. He let the captured staff drop from his hand. It clattered on the stone floor, the sound echoing loudly in the tense silence. He held up his empty hands, a gesture of peace that was completely at odds with the immense power radiating from his body. The two women tensed, expecting a trick. Then, Naruto spoke. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried across the vast cavern with ease, cutting through the oppressive magical hum. It was calm, measured, and held a core of steel that was impossible to ignore. "I'd rather not fight you," he said, his golden eyes meeting theirs without flinching. "Start talking, now." The ultimatum hung in the air, a challenge thrown back in their faces. He wasn't begging. He wasn't asking. He was demanding. He was the one who had been summoned, attacked, and threatened, yet he was the one taking control of the situation. Erza's eyes narrowed slightly. This was not the reaction of a confused, frightened victim. It was the reaction of a seasoned warrior, a commander on a battlefield. He wasn't intimidated by her Heaven's Wheel armor or Mirajane's demonic form. He was analyzing them, weighing them, and had seemingly decided they weren't worth the effort of a real fight. It was both insulting and, to her surprise, intriguing. Mirajane's demonic smile wavered. She had expected fear, or perhaps mindless rage. This calm, co-NFI-dent authority was something else entirely. He met her gaze, and for a fleeting moment, she felt as if he could see past the monstrous form, past the carefully constructed walls, and into the lonely, angry girl at the heart of the demon. The feeling was so unsettling it momentarily broke her concentration. The standoff stretched, second by second. The swords remained poised. The demonic energy continued to churn. But the initial momentum was lost. The stranger had seized it with nothing but a few words and an unshakable presence. He had made it clear that if a fight were to happen, it would be on his terms. And it would be because they chose to escalate it. And for the first time since this damnable plan had been set in motion, both Erza Scarlet and Mirajane Strauss found themselves hesitating. The silence was finally broken by Makarov, who hobbled forward, his staff tapping against the stone. "Enough." His voice was quiet, but it held the weight of a guild master and a wizard saint. Erza and Mirajane both looked to him, their lethal stances relaxing almost imperceptibly. "He is right," Makarov said, his eyes fixed on Naruto. "We have brought him here against his will. We owe him an explanation." He turned his gaze to Lahar. "Stand your men down. All of them. There will be no more hostilities." Lahar looked like he wanted to argue, but a single glare from Makarov silenced him. He gave a curt nod, and the remaining soldiers lowered their weapons, their relief palpable. Erza let out a slow breath. With a shimmer of light, her armor and swords vanished, replaced once more by her standard battle attire. Across from her, the violet darkness receded from Mirajane, her demonic form melting away until she was once again the smiling, graceful woman in a simple dress. The sudden release of magical pressure made the air feel thin and empty. Naruto, however, did not relax. The orange pigmentation around his eyes remained, his senses still on high alert. He watched them, waiting. He had won the first exchange without throwing a single punch. Now, he would get his answers. The chapter did not end with the promise of a fight, but with the heavy, suffocating weight of a truth that was about to be revealed. A truth that had caused the Magic Council to commit an act of interdimensional kidnapping, and a truth that would change the lives of everyone in that cavern forever. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Weight of a Prophecy. The heavy silence that followed Makarov's command was a different kind of pressure. The immediate threat of violence had vanished, replaced by the crushing weight of unspoken intentions. Naruto remained in sage mode, a silent, golden-eyed statue amidst the groaning forms of Lahar's men. He watched as the old man, Makarov, approached, his wooden staff tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm on the stone floor. It was the sound of a judge approaching the gallows. "My name is Makarov Dreyar," the old man said, his voice weary but firm. He stopped a respectful distance away. "On behalf of the Magic Council of Fury, I offer our deepest apologies for the aggressive welcome. I assure you, it was not our primary intention. Your primary intention was kidnapping, Naruto countered, his tone flat and devoid of heat. It was a simple statement of fact. The welcome was just details. Makarov had the grace to look chagrined. A harsh truth, but a truth nonetheless. We are desperate men, young one, and desperate men often resort to unforgivable actions. Behind him, Erza and Mirajane stood as silent witnesses. Erza's arms were crossed over her chest, her expression one of stern self-recrimination. She had been prepared to fight him, to subdue him, and the ease with which he had handled the council's elite and the sheer confidence he now projected made her re-evaluate everything she had assumed. He wasn't a wild beast to be tamed. He was a commander, and they had just tried to put a leash on a lion. Mirajane's serene smile had returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. She was studying Naruto with a renewed, calculating intensity. His power was immense, that was obvious, but it was his composure that was truly dangerous. He held all the cards, and he knew it. He hadn't just defeated the soldiers, he had dismantled the council's entire plan in under a minute with his refusal to be intimidated. We have a chamber prepared where we can speak freely. Makarov gestured towards a large, stone archway that Naruto hadn't paid much attention to before. Lahar, see to your men. No one is to follow us. This conversation is for our ears only. Lahar, his face a mixture of humiliation and fury, gave a stiff, formal bow. As you command, Master Makarov. Naruto let the natural energy recede. The orange markings around his eyes vanished, and his pupils returned to their normal vibrant blue. The sudden drop in his sensory input was like going from a world of color to one of black and white, but he kept his guard up. He gave a slight nod, a silent agreement to the parley. There was no point standing in a room full of unconscious soldiers forever. The chamber they entered was a stark contrast to the cavernous ritual site. It was a simple, circular room, lit by glowing lacrima crystals embedded in the walls. A single round table of dark, polished wood sat in the center, surrounded by 4 chairs. It was a room designed for tense negotiations. As soon as the heavy stone door boomed shut behind them, the air became thick with expectation. Makarov took a seat, gesturing for the others to do the same. Erza and Mirajane sat on either side of him, moving with a practiced synchronicity. Naruto remained standing. You'll understand if I prefer to stay on my feet, he said, his eyes scanning the room. No traps, no hidden observers he could sense. Just the 4 of them. As you wish, Makarov sighed. He placed his hands on the table, the wood seeming to groan under the invisible weight of his next words. There is no easy way to say this, so I will be direct. We have summoned you here as a last resort. Our world, Earthland, is facing a threat of unimaginable magnitude. An existential threat that our magic alone cannot defeat. Naruto listened, his expression unreadable. He had heard speeches like this before. He had given them, millennia ago. Makarov continued, his voice dropping to a low, somber tone, our ancestors F.A. ced a being they called the Animus Anomaly. It was not a creature of our world. It came from the void between realities, a parasitic entity that does not eat flesh or drink blood, but consumes magic itself. It drains the life from the very land, leaving behind nothing but a silent, dead husk. He paused, letting the words sink in. They were barely able to defeat it. Not by killing it. It seems it cannot be killed, but by sealing it away in a dimensional prison. That seal has been weakening for decades. Now, it is on the verge of shattering completely. All our best scholars and mages predict it has less than a year before it breaks entirely. Erza picked up the narrative, her voice as sharp and clear as a steel blade. The Magic Council has exhausted every known option. We have tried reinforcing the seal, but it's like trying to patch a collapsing dam with paper. We've sought out lost magics, ancient weapons. Nothing we have is sufficient. The anomaly has grown stronger in its prison, and we have grown complacent in our peace. Quote, Naruto's gaze shifted to her. He said nothing, but his silence was a prompt. Get to the point. It was Mirajane who delivered the final, damning piece of the puzzle. Her voice was soft, melodic, a stark and chilling contrast to the words she spoke. The ancient texts that described the sealing also contained a prophecy, a desperate contingency. It foretold that if the seal were ever to fail, the world's only hope would be to summon a warrior from another reality. A warrior from a sun-drenched world, whose own life force was fundamentally different from our magic. Someone whose energy signature was so unique, it could change the very nature of our own. She looked up at him, her blue eyes holding his. The fabricated smile was gone, replaced by a look of profound, weary resignation. The prophecy states that this warrior's bloodline is the key. That for our world to survive, this champion must sire a new generation. Children born of his unique life force and the strongest magic of our world would possess a hybrid power, a synergy that could stand against the anomaly and restore the seal for another millennium. Silence. The word hung in the air between them, ugly and obscene. Sire. Naruto's expression didn't change. Not a flicker of surprise, not a hint of anger. He just stood there, his blue eyes seeming to darken, to grow colder, until they were the color of a winter sky. He had been a weapon. He had been a pariah. He had been a messiah. He had been a lot of things in his life. But a stud animal, that was a new one. They want to what? Kurama's roar in his mind was a blast of pure, unadulterated rage. These insolent insects, they dare to view you, the hero of the fourth great ninja war, as nothing more than breeding stock. Let me out, Naruto. I'll burn their entire pathetic mountain to the ground. Naruto mentally pushed back against the fox's fury, a firm and absolute command for silence. He needed a clear head for this. He let the silence stretch, forcing the three of them to sit with the sheer, unadulterated ugliness of what they had just said. He saw the shame in Makarov's eyes, the rigid discomfort in Erza's posture. The flicker of self-loathing in Mirajan's gaze. They knew what they were asking was monstrous. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. No, it was just one word. But it was delivered with the finality of a guillotine's blade. Makarov flinched as if struck. Young man, please, you must understand. I understand perfectly. Naruto cut him off, his voice still quiet but now laced with an arctic chill. You have a big, scary monster to deal with, and instead of figuring out how to fight it yourselves, you looked at some old book and decided the best plan was to abduct a stranger and force him to, what? Impregnate your strongest female mages. Did you draw lots, or was there an audition? The sarcasm was a physical blow. Erza's head snapped up, a flash of anger and humiliation in her eyes. Mirajane looked down at her hands on the table, her knuckles white. That is not, Erza began, her voice tight. Isn't it? Naruto took a step toward the table, and for the first time, they felt a sliver of the true pressure he could exert. It wasn't chakra, it was pure presence. The force of a will that had bent the world to its ideals. You didn't summon a hero. You didn't ask for an ally. You summoned a tool, a biological solution to a magical problem. I have spent my entire life, he said, his voice dropping even lower, fighting against being seen as just the monster sealed inside me. As just a weapon for my village. I will not, for 1 second, entertain the idea of being reduced to a prize bowl for yours. He looked directly at Erza, then at Mirajane. My answer is no, absolutely not. The discussion is over. He turned his back on them, intending to walk towards the door. He didn't know how he would open it, or where he would go, but the conversation was finished. We cannot send you back, Makarov said, his voice rising in desperation. The ritual was one way. We expended centuries of stored magical energy just to open the gate. We don't know how to reverse it. Naruto stopped, his back still to them. That was a complication, a serious one, but it didn't change his answer. Then you'd better start figuring it out, he said without turning around. Because I am not your tool. A tense silence filled the room again. Erza and Mirajane exchanged a look. It was a look of shared misery, of shared violation. He had put into words the very thing they had both been feeling. They were not saviors in this plan. They were sacrifices, just as he was. And his absolute, unwavering rejection of that fate resonated with something deep inside both of them. Finally, Makarov spoke again, his voice softer, stripped of its earlier desperation and filled with a profound sadness. You are right. We have wronged you, grievously. We allowed our fear to override our morality. And for that, I am truly sorry. Naruto slowly turned back to face them. He saw a genuine apology in the old man's eyes. It didn't fix anything, but it was a start. He walked back to the table. But he didn't sit. He leaned forward, placing his hands on its surface, his gaze pinning each of them in turn. "So let's get something straight," he said, his voice now crisp and businesslike. The voice of a leader taking command of a failing mission. "Your plan is garbage. It's insulting, it's immoral, and it probably wouldn't have worked anyway. So we're throwing it out. Completely." He straightened up. "But here's what's going to happen instead. You have a world-ending threat. I, unfortunately, happen to be in this world, and I have a personal policy against letting worlds end if I can help it. So, I will help you. I will fight your animus anomaly. I will face it as a warrior, an ally, not a breeder." He pointed a finger at Makarov. "In return, you and your CIL will dedicate every available resource, every brilliant mind you have, to one single task, finding a way to send me home. That is the deal. You get my help in your war, and I get a ticket back to my own. Is that understood?" The sheer audacity of the counter-offer left them speechless. He had taken their desperate, flawed plan and reforged it in an instant. He had seized control of the entire situation, setting his own terms. Defining his own role. He was not their pawn. He would be their partner, or their enemy. The choice was theirs. Makarov looked at Erza, then at Mirajane. He saw the answer in their eyes. He saw the flicker of respect, of relief. He saw the first glimmers of hope that wasn't tied to a shameful prophecy. He looked back at Naruto and gave a slow, solemn nod. "The deal is accepted. You have my word. I will offer you sanctuary in my own guild, Fairy Tail. You will be treated as one of our own, an honored ally." "Good," Naruto said, his tone relaxing slightly. "Then the first thing I need is a drink. And then, you can tell me everything you know about this anomaly. We have a war to plan." The entrance to the Fairy Tail Guild Hall was not a grand affair. It was a pair of large, sturdy wooden doors that looked like they had been kicked open more times than they had been politely opened. As Naruto, Makarov, Erza, and Mirajane approached, the sounds from within grew from a low rumble to an outright cacophony. It was the sound of shouting, crashing, and the occasional explosion. It sounded like home. Makarov pushed the doors open, and the chaos washed over them. The main hall was a sprawling, raucous mess. Tables were overturned. A man with no shirt was breathing fire. A blue cat was trying to sell a fish to a woman in a bikini who was currently encased in a block of ice. It was utter, glorious pandemonium, and at the center of it all, a pink-haired boy in a scarf was locked in a furious brawl with a dark-haired boy who was inexplicably stripping off his clothes. "I'm all fired up now," the pink-haired one roared, his fist igniting in flames. The entire guild seemed to stop mid-brawl as their master entered. They all turned, their expressions shifting from aggression to surprise, and then to curiosity as they saw the stranger standing with him. "Master, you're back," the pink-haired boy, Natsu, yelled, completely forgetting his fight. His eyes immediately locked onto Naruto. "Who's the new guy? He looks strong. Fight me." Before anyone could react, Natsu launched himself across the room, his fist cocked back for a fire dragon's iron fist. Naruto didn't even seem to move. He simply tilted his head slightly. As Natsu's fist flew past where his face had been, Naruto's hand shot out, not in a punch, but with a single, extended finger. He flicked Natsu's forehead. It wasn't a hard flick. It was casual, almost lazy. But it was infused with a microscopic, perfectly controlled burst of chakra. The effect was comical. Natsu's eyes went wide with shock. His forward momentum stopped instantly, and he was launched backward as if he'd been hit by a cannonball. He flew through the air, sailed over the bar, and crashed into the wall behind it with a loud, hollow thud. Before sliding down to the floor in a heap, the entire guild hall went dead silent. Every jaw was on the floor. Even the blue cat had dropped its fish. They had all seen Natsu get hit before, but they had never, ever seen him taken out with a single flick to the forehead. Naruto paid the stunned silence no mind. He walked calmly past the wreckage, stepped over an overturned bench, and slid onto a stool at the now vacant bar. He turned to Mirajane, who was looking at the Natsu-shaped dent in her wall with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, her carefully constructed composure finally shattered. "I'll have whatever's strongest," Naruto said, as if nothing had happened. He glanced over his shoulder. Erza was standing by the door, her arms still crossed, but a small, almost imperceptible smile was playing on her lips. For the first time all day, it looked genuine. He had made his position clear. He was not their savior. He was not their tool. He was Naruto Uzumaki, and he had just arrived in Fairy Tail. The chapter ended with Naruto at the bar, Erza on one side of him and Mirajane, who had shaken off her shock and was now pouring a drink with a genuinely intrigued smile, on the other. The air was no longer filled with the tension of a prophecy, but with the awkward, unspoken understanding of a new and utterly explosive alliance. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Synergy and Sabotage. The morning after Naruto's arrival, the Fairy Tail Guild Hall was in a state of controlled chaos that was, he was learning, its natural state of being. The hole in the wall behind the bar had been hastily patched with raw lumber, a testament to Natsu's impromptu flight the previous evening. The pink-haired dragon slayer himself was currently trying to start a fight with Gray over a stolen pastry. A conflict that was periodically interrupted by a flying beer mug or a stray chair thrown from another, unrelated brawl across the room. It was loud, violent, and surprisingly cheerful. Naruto sat at a corner table, nursing a glass of water and observing the maelstrom with a detached amusement. He had slept in a spare room upstairs, a simple cot that felt more comfort able than many of the field tents he'd used in his life. But sleep had been fitful. His senses, even without Sage Mode, were constantly on edge, trying to catalog the unfamiliar thrum of magical energy that permeated this world. It was like trying to sleep next to a power station. Kurama had been grumbling in his mind all night. A guild of fools and children. They'd last 5 minutes in a real battle. They've got heart. Naruto had thought back, a faint smile on his face. That counts for something. Erza approached his table, carrying a plate with a slice of strawberry cake on it. She aced it in front of him with a quiet thud, her expression as serious as ever. "You did not eat breakfast." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a minor tactical oversight she was now correcting. "Not much of an appetite," Naruto admitted, though he eyed the cake. "It did look good. Food is fuel for a warrior," she stated simply, taking a seat opposite him. "To neglect it is to neglect your duty to be prepared." Before he could respond, Mirajane arrived, gliding to the table with a pot of tea and 2 cups. She smiled, a genuine, warm expression that seemed to momentarily quell the chaos around them. "Good morning, Naruto-san." "Erza, I hope you slept well." "Well enough," Naruto said. The contrast between the two women was as stark as night and day. Erza was a pillar of discipline and strength, her presence a silent command for order. Mirajane was a sea of calm and grace, her presence a gentle suggestion of peace. Yet Naruto had felt the true power lurking beneath both of their surfaces. One was a living armory, the other a vessel for a demon. He found himself sitting between two of the most dangerous forces he had ever encountered, and they were offering him cake and tea. It was surreal. "So," he began, deciding to cut to the chase. "What's the plan? I assume your master is already talking to your council, trying to fulfill his end of our bargain." "He is," Mirajane confirmed, pouring the tea. "He left for the capital, Era, at dawn. He expects resistance. Not everyone on the council is as reasonable as he is." "And what are we supposed to do?" Naruto asked. "Sit here and wait." "No," Erza said, her gaze firm. "We have a mission." She pushed a piece of paper across the table. It was a request form, an official S-class quest from the guild's private board. Naruto picked it up. The handwriting was frantic, splattered with what looked like water stains. "Emergency request. Port village of Harjan. A beast of unknown origin has taken residence in the sea caves along the coast. It has attacked 3 fishing vessels. Survivors speak of a creature whose hide repels magic and whose roar can shatter stone. The local Rune Knight garrison has been ineffective. Please, Fairy Tail, we need your strongest." "Harjan," Naruto read aloud. "That's on the coast. It's a 2-hour train ride," Erza explained. "The request came in yesterday, but with the events of last night, Makarov held it. This morning, he decided it would be the perfect opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" Mirajan's smile became a little more knowing. To see how we work together, of course. A field test. Naruto looked from the request form to the two women. A magic repellent beast. A test of teamwork. It was a challenge, and a clear step towards fulfilling his side of the deal. He hadn't come to this world to sit around. He had come to fight, and then to go home. He pushed the plate with the cake back towards Erza. All right, but I'm eating this on the way. The train ride to Harjan was a lesson in modern marvels for Naruto. The concept of a large metal carriage moving on its own without tracks made of chakra-infused metal was a novelty. He spent most of the journey looking out the window, watching the verdant, unfamiliar landscape of Fury rush by. The trees were different, the shape of the mountains sharper. Everything was saturated with that magical energy, a constant hum at the edge of his senses. He sat in a carriage with Erza and Mirajane. The initial awkwardness had settled into a quiet, professional tension. Erza was meticulously polishing the gauntlet of her armor. Her movements precise and practiced. Mirajane was reading a book, a faint smile on her face. To any casual observer, they were just three travelers on their way to the coast. Tell me about this beast, Naruto said. Breaking the silence. The request said it repels magic. How is that possible? There are several forms of magic-resistant creatures, Erza answered without looking up from her work. Some have hides infused with minerals that disrupt the flow of ether nano. Others, like the land dragons of the northern peaks, have innate magical barriers. But for a sea creature to have such an ability is rare. And for it to be this aggressive is rarer still. Magic here, it comes from the environment, right? Naruto asked, probing. You call it ether nano. It is the source of all magic, Mirajane explained. Closing her book. It exists in the atmosphere, in the earth, in all living things. Mages have an internal vessel that allows them to absorb and shape it into spells. So it's like natural energy, Naruto mused. Mostly to himself. But you shape it directly. We have to convert it, blend it with our own spiritual and physical energy to make chakra. Erza and Mirajane exchanged a look. His casual explanation of an entirely different energy system was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. It underscored just how alien he truly was. This beast, Naruto continued, his eyes focused on the distant sea now visible on the horizon. When did it first appear? About a week ago, Erza said. The attacks have been escalating. At first, it was just sightings. Now, it's actively sinking ships. And its location is consistent. These sea caves. Yes, it seems to be territorial. Naruto fell silent, processing the information. A powerful, territorial creature that was resistant to the primary weapon system of this world. Aggressive, but not expansionist. Something had either driven it here, or it had recently changed. He thought of Makarov's words about the animus anomaly, the entity that consumed magic. What would its leaking energy do to the world's wildlife? It would be like radiation poisoning, Kurama supplied from the back of his mind. Corrupting, mutating, making creatures stronger, more violent. This won't be a simple animal, Kit. It'll be a monster born of a dying world. The thought settled in Naruto's stomach like a cold stone. He wasn't just here to hunt a beast. He was here to face the first symptom of the plague that threatened to consume this entire reality. The port town of Harjan was quieter than it should have been. The docks were mostly empty. The usual bustle of fishermen and merchants replaced by a nervous, huddled silence. The air smelled of salt, fish, and fear. The local mayor, a portly man with a sweat-stained collar, met them at the station. His relief at seeing Erza and Mirajane palpable. His eyes kept darting to Naruto, a mixture of awe and apprehension. News of fairy tale traveled fast, but the rumors of a new, possibly powerful member had apparently traveled even faster. Thank you for coming, the mayor sputtered, wringing his hands. The attacks are getting worse. It came out at high tide last night. Smashed part of the main pier with its tail. The whole town is terrified. Can you describe the creature? Erza asked, her tone all business. It's huge, the mayor exclaimed. Bigger than a fishing trawler. Its back is covered in something like obsidian shells, and it has these glowing purple veins all over its body. And its eyes, they glow with the same horrible light. Purple veins. A sickly, unnatural glow. Naruto's suspicion hardened into certainty. This was a direct result of the anomaly. "Take us to the caves," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the mayor's panicked rambling. "We'll handle it from here." The sea caves were a series of jagged wounds in the cliff face west of the town. The tide was low, revealing a treacherous stretch of black, slick rock and shallow pools. The entrance to the largest cave was a gaping maw, darkness coiling within it like a sleeping serpent. The air grew heavy, charged with a corrupt, static energy that made Naruto's teeth ache. "This is it," Erza said, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. "The energy signature is strong. It's inside. What's the plan?" Mirajane asked, her usual smile gone, replaced by a focused, predatory readiness. "Do we draw it out? Or go in?" "Going in is a tactical mistake," Erza stated. "It knows the terrain. We don't. We'd be fighting in a cramped, dark space against a creature of unknown abilities." "She's right," Naruto agreed, his eyes scanning the cave mouth. He closed them for a moment, extending his senses, pulling in the natural energy of the area. The normal, clean hum of the ocean and the rocks was distorted, soured by a dissonant, hungry static that emanated from the cave. It felt foul, but drawing it out might not be easy if its content to stay in there. "We need a lure." He knelt down, picking up a rock the size of his fist. He channeled a minuscule amount of chakra into it, just enough to make it hum with energy. "Let's see if it's hungry." With a flick of his wrist, he sent the rock skimming across the water. It skipped once, twice, and then flew straight into the darkness of the cave. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the distant surf. Then, a roar erupted from the depths. It wasn't the roar of an animal. It was the sound of grinding rock and cracking reality. A wave of pure concussive force blasted out of the cave, kicking up a spray of seawater and forcing them to brace themselves. The very air seemed to vibrate with a deep, nauseating bass. A shape began to emerge from the darkness. It was immense, far larger than the mayor had described. Its body was a hybrid of a colossal crustacean and a deep-sea reptile, a hulking mass of armored plates and powerful limbs. The shells on its back were not obsidian, they were a strange, non-reflective material that seemed to drink the light. And crisscrossing its body were pulsating veins of violet energy, a toxic, corrupting light that pulsed in time with a monstrous heartbeat. Its head was a nightmare of mandibles and glowing, multifaceted eyes, all burning with that same purple fire. The creature hauled its massive body onto the rocks, its heavy claws scraping deep gouges in the stone. It fixed its alien gaze upon them, and Naruto felt a wave of pure, undiluted malice, a hunger not for food, but for the energy that radiated from the three of them. "So," Naruto said, a grim line to his lips. "That's our beast." Erza didn't waste a second. "Requip. Heaven's Wheel." In a flash of light, she was clad in her winged armor, 100 swords manifesting in a halo behind her. "Go." Circle of swords. The blades shot forward, a silver torrent aimed at the creature's head. They struck the armored carapace with a series of deafening clangs, but the effect was minimal. Sparks flew, but the swords either bounced off the strange shell or shattered completely, their magical energy seemingly neutralized on impact. The beast barely seemed to notice. It opened its maw and let out another roar, this one directed at Erza. It wasn't just sound, it was a focused blast of raw, kinetic force. "Look out," Naruto yelled. He was already moving, appearing in front of Erza in a blur. Sage Art. Massive Rasengan. He slammed the giant, swirling sphere of chakra into the incoming sonic blast. The two forces met with an earth-shattering explosion. The Rasengan tore through the sound wave, but dissipated in the process. The force of the impact sending Naruto sliding back several feet on the slick rocks. The beast was completely unharmed. His attack, like Erza's, had been nullified before it could connect. "My turn," Mirajane said, her voice dropping into a dangerous, layered tone. The familiar wave of demonic power erupted from her as she transformed into her Satan soul form. With a beat of her powerful wings, she shot into the air, her hands gathering a sphere of dark, crackling energy. Soul extinction. She unleashed the blast, a massive beam of pure destructive magic that could level a city block. It slammed into the creature's flank. For a moment, it seemed to work. The beast bellowed in what sounded like pain, stumbling sideways. But as the dark energy washed over it, he Purple veins on its body flared brightly. It was absorbing the magic. Feeding on it. The soul extinction faded, and the beast looked stronger than before, its glowing eyes now fixed on Mirajane with ravenous hunger. It's eating our attacks, Naruto grunted, getting his feet back under him. This thing is a living magic sink. We need a new strategy, Erza said, her mind racing as she dodged a sweeping claw that could have crushed a building. Its armor is too thick for physical attacks, and its body absorbs magical ones. There must be a weakness. This was the test, not of their power, but of their ability to think and fight as one. Keep it distracted, Naruto yelled, creating a dozen shadow clones. I need to get a better look at it. The clones fanned out, a swarm of orange and blah. CK that immediately began harassing the creature from all sides. They were fast and agile, leaping from rock to rock, throwing kunai that bounced harmlessly off its shell, and trying to land hits that did no damage. But they served their purpose. The monster was confused, its multifaceted eyes trying to track all the targets at once, its massive claws swiping at clones that simply puffed into smoke. While the clones caused chaos, Erza took on the role of a tank. She re-equipped into her adamantine armor, a massive, shield-like suit that prioritized defense above all else. She stood her ground, acting the brunt of the beast's direct attacks, her shield groaning under the force of blows that cracked the bedrock beneath her feet. High above, Mirajane provided aerial support, firing smaller, demonic blasts not at the beast's body, but at the rocks around its feet, trying to throw it off balance and control its movement. This gave Naruto the opening he needed. The real Naruto, cloaked in the natural energy of Sage Mode, became a ghost. He moved along the edges of the battle, his senses wide open, analyzing the creature not as a warrior, but as a surgeon looking for the incision point. He saw the flow of energy within it. The magic it absorbed wasn't just vanishing, it was being channeled through those purple veins, all of it converging on a single point at the base of its skull, where the head met the armored torso. There was a node there, a swollen, pulsating mass of violet tissue that was barely protected by the overlapping shells. That was the core, that was the weak point. But it was almost impossible to reach. The beast was constantly moving, and the point was shielded by a thick collar of shell. A straight-on attack was out of the question. Naruto's mind raced. He needed power, precision, and an attack that was so fast and so overwhelming that the creature couldn't absorb it in time. There was only one technique in his arsenal that fit the bill. But it was a straight-line attack. He couldn't get the angle. He looked at Erza, holding her ground against impossible odds. He looked at Mirajane, controlling the airspace. They were fighting separately, coordinating, but not yet combining. He had an idea, a crazy, probably stupid idea. But it was the only one he had. He created a single clone and had it sneak over to Erza's position. Erza-san. The clone yelled over the din of battle. The real me has a plan. He's found a weak point at the base of its neck. But he can't get a clear shot. He needs a distraction, a huge one. And he needs you to do something unconventional. Erza grunted as she blocked another blow, the force of it making her skid back a foot. What is it? The clone relayed Naruto's insane plan. Erza's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. It was unorthodox, reckless, and completely outside the bounds of any combat doctrine she had ever studied. It relied on perfect timing and absolute trust in a man she had known for less than a day. She looked over and saw the real Naruto, crouched on a high ledge, his hands already forming the first stages of a technique that made the very air around him scream. She saw the absolute confidence in his posture. Tell him to be ready, she said, a grim smile touching her lips. This had better work. Erza took a deep breath. Requip. Armadura Fairy. In another flash of light, she was clad in one of her most powerful armors. A pink, ornate suit that greatly amplified her destructive power. But she didn't summon its usual energy lances. Instead, she turned to the hundreds of swords till floating in the air from her initial Heaven's Wheel assault. At the same time, Naruto finished his preparations. Wind style. Rasenshuriken. A vortex of raw, destructive power formed in his hand. A miniature typhoon that shrieked like 1,000 birds. It was pure, shape-transformed chakra, a storm of microscopic wind blades that attacked on a cellular level. It wasn't a magic spell the beast could eat. It was a physical phenomenon that would shred it from the inside out. Now, Erza commanded. She wasn't speaking to Naruto. She was speaking to her swords. Instead of flying at the beast, the 100 blades shot towards Naruto's position. They didn't attack him. They formed a massive, swirling cage of steel around the Rasenshuriken in his hand. Mirajane, Erza bellowed. Hit its left side. Drive it towards the cliff. Mirajane, seeing the impossible formation of swords, didn't question the command. She gathered all the power she could and unleashed a titanic blast of demonic energy, not at the beast, but at the water beside it. The resulting explosion of steam and force caused the creature to flinch away, staggering to its right, directly into the position they needed. For one critical second, the weak point at the base of its neck was exposed. Do it, Erza screamed. Naruto threw the Rasenshuriken. The shuriken of wind screamed through the air, but it wasn't flying straight. Erza, with a master's control, was manipulating her swords, using them not as weapons, but as deflectors. A blade would appear in the Rasenshuriken's path, its flat side angled perfectly, and NUD. GE the projectile's trajectory by a few degrees. Another sword would appear a few feet later, correcting it again. They were creating a guided missile delivery system out of 100 swords, steering the unstoppable wind jutsu around the creature's impenetrable armor, guiding it on a perfect, curving path. The beast sensed the danger. It tried to turn, to bring its armored head around to block, but it was too late. The Rasenshuriken, guided by Erza's blades, slipped past its defenses and struck the pulsating violet node at the base of its neck. There was no grand explosion. There was only a high-pitched, deafening shriek as the wind blades tore the node apart on a molecular level. The creature's roar cut off abruptly. The purple veins all over its body flickered violently and then went dark. The light in its eyes extinguished. For a long second, the colossal monster stood frozen, a statue of dead flesh and inert shell. Then, with a groan of stressed matter, it collapsed, crashing into the water with a tidal wave of a splash that drenched them all. Silence descended, broken only by the sound of dripping water and their own ragged breaths. Naruto landed on the rocks beside Erza, his sage mode fading. He was breathing heavily, the Rasenshuriken having taken its toll. Erza stood, her armor still pristine, but her face was beaded with sweat from the concentration required to guide her sword so precisely. Mirajane landed softly beside them, her demonic form melting away, leaving her looking tired but triumphant. They had done it. They had faced an impossible foe and, through a combination of their unique abilities, had won. Naruto looked at Erza, a grin spreading across his face. Unconventional enough for you. Erza looked at the dead behemoth, then back at him. A rare, genuine smile broke through her stern facade. It was an acceptable tactic. Mirajane giggled, the sound light and airy. I think we make a pretty good team. It was in that moment of shared victory, of relief and newfound respect, that Naruto felt it. His smile vanished. His head snapped up, his gaze sweeping across the distant cliffs overlooking the coastline. What is it? Erza asked, immediately sensing the change in his demeanor. We were being watched, Naruto said, his voice low and dangerous. He reactivated Sage mode in a heartbeat, his senses expanding, desperately searching. There were presences up there, cold, unnatural. Quote, he could still feel the faintest echo of them, a lingering stain on the natural energy of the area. It was a sterile, empty feeling, like the absence of life. They were gone, having vanished the moment the battle ended. Who? Mirajane asked, her own senses straining, finding nothing. I don't know, Naruto said, his eyes narrowed. But they weren't here to watch the fight. He leapt from rock to rock, his speed astonishing, and scaled the cliff face in seconds. He stood where he had felt the presences, scanning the ground. There was nothing, no footprints, no signs of passage. But there was a faint energy signature left behind, completely alien to him. It wasn't Ethernano. It wasn't the foul energy of the anomaly. It was something else, something clean, ordered, and utterly devoid of warmth. The energy of a surgical instrument, of a cage. They had not been watching the beast. They had been watching him. The journey back to Magnolia was much quieter. The victory felt hollow, tainted by the mystery of the unseen observers. Naruto described the energy signature to Erza and Mirajane, but it was nothing they had ever encountered. It wasn't the magic of a dark guild or any known mage. They arrived back at the guild hall late that night, tired and soaked to the bone. They were greeted with cheers. The mayor of Harjan had already sent a message ahead, proclaiming them heroes. The guild was in full party mode, celebrating their first major S-class success with their new ally. But the three of them were in no mood to celebrate. They gave their report to Mikao and Wakaba, the acting guild masters in Makarov's absence, detailing the beast's nature and the strange observers. The news cast a pall over the festivities. Later, as the party raged on, Naruto found a quiet spot on the guild's roof, looking up at a sky full of unfamiliar stars. The air was cool, carrying the sounds of laughter and music from below. "You should be down there," a voice said. Erza had followed him up, a plate in her hand. This time, it held a simple meat bun. "They are celebrating you." "Not much of a party animal," Naruto admitted, taking the offered food with a grateful nod. "Too much on my mind." "The observers," she stated. "Yeah." He took a bite of the bun. "This world is more complicated than your master let on. It's not just some big monster in a cage. There are other players on the board." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars. "That was a foolish risk you took today," Erza said softly. "Trusting me with your technique like that, was it?" Naruto countered. "I saw how you fight. Precise. Controlled. I knew you could do it." He looked at her. "Besides, sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. Trusting your comrades is the first step." His words seemed to strike a chord with her. She looked away, towards the town. "Trust has not always been a luxury I could afford." Before the conversation could go deeper, a third person joined them on the roof. Mirajane moved with a silent grace, carrying 2 mugs of what smelled like hot cider. "I thought you two might be cold," she said, her smile gentle as she handed them the drinks. She leaned against the railing beside Naruto. "You are worried, aren't you?" "I don't like being watched," Naruto said. "Especially when I don't know who's doing the watching, or why." "Perhaps," Mirajane said, her voice barely a whisper, "they are connected to the council. To the ones who believe you should be a prisoner, not a guest." It was a chilling thought, and one Naruto had already considered. A faction within the government that disagreed with Makarov's deal. A group that might take matters into their own hands. "Whatever they are," Naruto said, his voice hardening, "if they come for me, they'll find out I'm not as easy to handle as some mutated crab." They lapsed into a comfortable silence again, a silent trio under the stars. The shared danger, the impossible victory, and the new, looming threat had forged a bond between them faster and stronger than any conversation could. They were no longer just a mage, a demon, and an alien. They were a team. Their quiet moment was shattered by the sound of the guild doors banging open below, followed by a frantic voice shouting their names. Naruto, Erza, Mirajane. They looked down to see Levi Magarden, the guild's resident script mage. Standing in the doorway, her face pale with worry. She was holding a communication lacrima that was glowing with an urgent, pulsating light. "You need to come down here. Master Makarov just contacted us from Era. The council, they've called an emergency hearing about you, Naruto. They're saying you're too dangerous to be left with Fairy Tail. They want to take you into their custody." The word hung in the cold night air. Custody. A clean, ordered, sterile word. The same feeling as the energy signature on the cliffs. The other players were making their move. The fight was far from over. It was just moving to a different, more dangerous battlefield. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Council of Vultures. The journey to Era, the capital of Fiore's magical world, was a stark contrast to their mission to Harjan. There was no relaxed observation of the passing scenery, no quiet camaraderie. They rode in a lacrima-powered carriage provided by the council, a vehicle that was opulent and on the outside and oppressively silent within. Makarov had met them at the station in Magnolia, his face etched with grim lines. The emergency summons was not a request, but a command, and the speed with which it had been issued spoke of a political battle that had already been lost behind closed doors. Naruto sat across from the guild master, with Erza and Mirajane on either side of him. They were not his companions on this trip. They were his guards, his witnesses, his character references. The unspoken reality of the situation was a heavy cloak over them all. He had been in this world for less than 48 hours. And he was already being put on trial. Era was a city built to project power. Soaring white towers scraped a sky impossibly clear of clouds. The streets were wide, clean, and patrolled by rune knights in shining armor. It was pristine, perfect, and utterly sterile. It lacked the chaotic, vibrant life of Konoha, or even the rowdy, brawling heart of the fairy tale guild hall. This was a city of law, of order, of control. A gilded cage, Kurama grumbled in his mind. They build their walls high to convince themselves they're safe. Arrogance and fear, a dangerous combination. Naruto agreed silently. He had seen places like this before. Places where power was concentrated, where men in high-backed chairs made decisions that cost the lives of people they would never meet. He was not impressed. Their carriage did not stop in the city proper but continued up a winding road to a colossal fortress that seemed to be carved from the mountain itself. This was the headquarters of the Magic Council, the heart of their government. Lahar and a fresh contingent of custody enforcement mages were waiting for them at the gate. His expression was one of cold, professional vindication. He had been made to look a fool during Naruto's arrival, and now he was escorting that same man to judgment. Master Makarov, Erza-sama, Mirajane-sama, Lahar said, his bow stiff and formal. He didn't acknowledge Naruto at all. The council is in session. They are waiting for you. Follow me. He led them through vast, echoing halls of polished marble. The air was cool and still, only sound the rhythmic click of their footsteps and the silent hum of the powerful magical enchantments that lined the walls. It was a place designed to intimidate, to make any visitor feel small and insignificant before the weight of the institution. The hearing chamber was a grand amphitheater, a cavernous space of dark wood and gray stone. Tiers of seats rose up in a steep semicircle, all filled with the robed figures of the council members. Their faces were impassive, shadowed, looking down from their lofty perches like a flock of birds of prey. In the center of the room, on a raised circular platform, were 4 simple chairs. The defendant's box. You will wait here until you are called upon to speak, Lahar instructed, his voice ringing with authority he clearly savored. As they took their seats, the heavy doors behind them boomed shut, sealing them in. The ambient light in the chamber dimmed, leaving them illuminated in a single, accusatory spotlight. Naruto leaned back in his chair, seemingly unbothered, and crossed his arms over his chest. He slowly scanned the faces in the tiers above, his gaze sharp and analytical. He was not a defendant. He was a visitor in a zoo, serving the strange creatures in their natural habitat. The proceedings began without fanfare. An elderly, sour-faced man in the highest seat, the chairman, banged a gavel, the sound cracking like a whip in the silent chamber. This emergency session is now called to order, the chairman intoned, his voice dry as dust. We are here to address the matter of the entity, summoned from an unknown world, and its current placement under the care of the Fairy Tale Guild. A motion has been put forward by Lord Valerius to review this arrangement. Lord Valerius, the floor is yours. A man stood from one of the lower, more prominent tiers. He was handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features and silver hair tied back in a neat tail. He wore immaculate white and gold robes that marked him as a man of significant standing. He moved with a languid, confident grace, descending the steps to a speaker's podium that faced the central platform. He did not look at Naruto, but addressed the council as a whole, his voice smooth, cultured, and utterly reasonable. Honored chairman, esteemed members of the council, he began, his tone calm and respectful. Let me begin by making one thing perfectly clear. I do not stand here today as an accuser. I stand here as a concerned citizen of Fiori, a servant of this council, whose only desire is the continued safety and stability of our world. He turned his gaze, for the first time, to Naruto. His eyes were a pale, intelligent blue, and they held no malice. They held a look of profound, almost sympathetic, concern. We have before us a being of truly extraordinary power, Valerius said, his voice resonating with sincerity. The reports from Master Makarov, and from the incident in our own summoning chamber, attest to this. A power that can neutralize a dozen of our finest rune knights in mere seconds. A power that, according to the report from Harjan just this morning, was capable of annihilating an S-class magical beast that was completely impervious to our own magic. We should be grateful that such a force exists. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. It was a masterful opening. He wasn't attacking, he was praising. But we are leaders, he continued, his tone growing more serious. And it is our solemn duty to look beyond the immediate victory and consider the implications. Power, my friends, is fire. In a hearth, it provides warmth and light. Uncontrolled, it burns down the house. And the power this being wields is a conflagration the likes of which our world has never seen. He began to pace slowly, his movements captivating. He calls his energy, chakra. It is not born of Ethernano. It operates on principles we do not understand. It is a foreign agent introduced into a stable ecosystem. What are its long-term effects? How will it interact with our world's magical field? Could its very presence be a form of pollution, a contagion that could weaken or corrupt our own magic over time? We do not know. To leave an unknown variable in the hands of a guild, even one as esteemed, if notoriously destructive, as Fairy Tail, is, I submit, an act of gross negligence. A murmur went through the council. He was stalking their deepest fears, the fear of the unknown. The mission in Harjan is a perfect example, Valerius declared, picking up a scroll from his podium. The beast was destroyed, yes. But the report speaks of a technique that shrieked like 1,000 birds and inflicted damage on a cellular level. It speaks of an alliance with Erza Scarlet's re-equipped magic to guide this attack in an unpredictable, curving trajectory. This is not the measured application of magical force. This is chaotic, terrifying power, combined in reckless, experimental ways. What if they had missed? What collateral damage would such a weapon have inflicted upon the town of Harjan? Erza stiffened in her seat, her hands clenching into fists. He was twisting their triumph, their synergy, into a crime. I do not doubt the stranger's intentions, Valerius said, his voice softening again, turning back to Naruto with that look of deep concern. But I question his control. I question our ability to understand what he is. Therefore, I propose a solution that ensures the safety of all. Not a punishment, but a precaution. I move that the entity be placed in the protective custody of the Magic Council. He raised a hand to forestall the inevitable outcry. He would be housed in our most secure research facility at the North Spire. He would be treated not as a prisoner, but as an honored guest. He would be studied, his abilities catalogued, his energy understood. We would learn from him, and in doing so, we would safeguard our world from any unforeseen consequences of his presence. It is the logical, prudent, and only responsible course of action. He finished his speech and returned to his seat, the very picture of calm reason. The chamber was buzzing. He had laid out a case that was terrifyingly logical, appealing to the council's inherent caution and their distrust of anything they couldn't control. Master Makarov, the chairman said. Your response. Makarov stood, his small frame seeming to radiate an aura of pure indignation. My response is outrage. Lord Valerius speaks of safety and prudence. I see only fear and a hunger for control. He speaks of Naruto as an entity, a contagion. I have looked this young man in the eye. He is not a thing to be studied in a lab. He is a warrior, an ally who has already bled for a world that is not his own. He slammed his staff on the floor for emphasis. You speak of the danger of his power. The only reason he was forced to use it was to clean up a mess created by the anomaly you were all so terrified of. He is not the disease, he is the cure. And you want to lock him in a cage. The prophecy spoke of a champion, not a lab rat. To treat him as anything less is to spit in the face of the very magic that brought him here. Makarov's speech was passionate, fiery, and full of the spirit of Fairy Tail. But Naruto could see it was having little effect. These men were not moved by passion. They were moved by calculations of power and risk. Valerius had framed the debate perfectly, and Makarov's righteous anger was only making him look emotional and biased. Thank you, Master Makarov, the chairman said dismissively. He then turned his gaze to the central platform. We will now hear from the entity himself. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Naruto rose to his feet. The chamber fell silent. Every eye was on him. They expected a plea, a roar of defiance, an emotional outburst. He gave them none of that. He stood with a preternatural calm, his hands in his pockets. He didn't look at the chairman or the council members. He looked directly, and only, at Lord Valerius. Defense, Naruto said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the chamber. I have nothing to defend. Everything you said is true. A shocked silence greeted his words. Valerius raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise on his handsome face. My power is dangerous, Naruto continued, his voice as steady as a rock. It can level mountains. It can destroy things on a cellular level. It is chaotic, unpredictable, and I am still learning its limits. He paused, letting his admission sink in. You're right to be concerned. You would be fools not to be. He took his hands out of his pockets and let them hang at his sides. But you've made a fundamental error in your logic, Valerius. You look at my power and you see a threat to your stability, to your order. A weapon that you don't control. He took a step forward, his blue eyes locking onto the silver-haired lords with an intensity that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. I am a weapon, Naruto said, his voice dropping, becoming harder. I was forged in a world war you can't even begin to imagine. I am not ashamed of that. But every weapon has a purpose. It has a direction. And my purpose here, the entire reason for my existence in this room, is to be pointed at the animus anomaly. That is the deal I made. That is the promise I will keep. His gaze swept over the council members. Cold and dismissive. You talk about protective custody. About studying me. Let me be clear. I am not your subject. I am not your prisoner. And I am not your guest. I am an independent ally. You will treat me as such. If you try to cage me, I will break the cage. If you try to control me, I will show you what a lack of control really looks like. He turned his full attention back to a now pale Valerius. You don't fear that I'll destroy this world, my lord, Naruto said, a faint, dangerous smile touching his lips. You fear that I'll save it, and you won't be the one holding the leash when I do. Your proposal isn't about safety. It's about power. Your power. And I'm telling you right now, you can't have mine. He finished speaking and simply sat back down. The echo of his words hanging in the chamber like the smell of smoke after a lightning strike. He hadn't argued. He had dictated. He hadn't pleaded. He had warned. The sheer, unshakable charisma, the absolute clarity of his will, was a force more potent than any magic. The chamber was in an uproar. Some members were shouting in outrage, others in stunned admiration. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Valerius was on his feet, his calm, reasonable facade finally cracking. This is unacceptable. He threatens us. He proves my point. He is too dangerous, too arrogant to be left unchecked. He is a king on a battlefield, not a politician in a chamber. Valerius, a new voice cut in. It was deep and carried an easy authority. A large, powerfully built man with a prosthetic arm stood up from the council seats. Gildarts Clive. He speaks the truth. We need a sword, not a specimen. I vote to deny the motion. Let him remain with Fairy Tail. The tide had turned. Gildarts's endorsement, combined with Naruto's staggering display of personal power, swayed the wavering members. The chairman called for a vote. A show of glowing hands. The motion was defeated. It was close. Dangerously so. But it was defeated. Relief washed over Makarov, Erza, and Mirajane. They had won. This session is adjourned, the chairman declared, slamming his gavel one final time. As they were being escorted out of the chamber, a figure stepped out from an alcove, blocking their path. It was Lord Valerius. His face was a mask of cold fury, the charming politician completely gone, replaced by something much uglier. Lahar and his men kept a respectful distance. This was a confrontation for the powerful. A clever performance, Valerius said, his voice a low, venomous hiss directed solely at Naruto. You swayed the old fools and the sentimental warriors. But do not for 1 second believe this is over. Naruto met his gaze without flinching. I never thought it was. Valerius took a step closer. His pale blue eyes like chips of ice. This world has a delicate balance. Its magic is pure, ancient. You are a sickness, an impurity that has been injected into its heart. You may have convinced them you are a cure. But I know a plague when I see one. His polite facade was completely gone now, replaced by the chilling calm of a zealot. The council may be weak, but I am not. I will protect my world. I will see it cleansed. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The world will be purified of you, alien. That is a prophecy of my own making. The threat was absolute, a declaration of private war. It was no longer a matter of policy or debate. It was personal. Valerius straightened up, his charming smile returning as if it had never left. He gave a curt, mocking bow to them all and swept past, his white robes billowing behind him. They stood in the marble hallway, the victory they had just won feeling as fragile as glass. They had defeated the motion, but they had made a powerful, implacable enemy, one who operated in the shadows of the very institution that was supposed to protect them. The war for Earthland had just gained a second front. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Thunder and Sunlight. The air in the Fairy Tale Guild Hall had changed. The victory at the council, narrow though it was, should have been a cause for celebration. Instead, it had draped a pall of tension over the usual chaos. Lord Valerius's threat, relayed quietly by Makarov upon their return, had spread through the guild like a slow poison. Naruto was no longer just a powerful, strange newcomer. He was the eye of a political hurricane, and Fairy Tale had chosen to stand with him directly in its path. Guild members who had previously been eager to challenge or befriend him now kept a respectful, cautious distance. They would watch him from across the hall, whispering amongst themselves. He was a lightning rod, and nobody was sure if he would attract a cleansing rain or a catastrophic storm. Naruto, for his part, seemed oblivious to the shift. He spent his time quietly observing, learning the rhythms of the guild, and trying to parse the limited information Levi could find on interdimensional travel. He was a coiled spring of purpose in a room full of aimless energy, and the dissonance was palpable. The tension finally broke on the third day after their return from Era. It came not as a whisper, but as a crackle of ozone and a palpable drop in air pressure. Heads turned towards the second-floor balcony, leaning against the railing, looking down on the main hall with an air of bored arrogance, was a tall, powerfully built man with slicked-back blonde hair and a prominent lightning bolt-shaped scar over his right eye. He wore a large set of headphones around his neck and a fur-collared coat that seemed too warm for the inside of the guild. Laxus Drayar, the master's grandson and one of Fairy Tale's most formidable S-class mages, had been watching for 3 days. Now, he had clearly seen enough. So, Laxus's voice boomed, effortlessly cutting through the guild's chatter. It wasn't a shout, it was a resonant baritone that carried the implicit threat of thunder. That's him, is it? The alien the old man risked a war with the council for. All activity in the guild ceased. Natsu, who had been about to punch Gray, froze mid-swing. Kana lowered her barrel of ale. Everyone looked up at Laxus, then nervously towards Naruto, who was sitting at a table with Erza and Mirajane, going over a crude map of Fury. Naruto didn't look up. He continued tracing a line on the map with his finger. If you have something to say, you can come down here and say it. I'm not going to crane my neck for you. A low chuckle rumbled in Laxus's chest. Cocky. I heard you were. I also heard you took out a dozen rune knights without breaking a sweat, flattened a magic-proof monster, and then told the entire magic council where they could stick their rules. He pushed off the railing, his heavy boots thudding on the wooden floorboards of the balcony. Sounds like a lot of trouble. I'm full of surprises, Naruto said, finally looking up. His blue eyes were calm, meeting Laxus's challenging gaze without a flicker of intimidation. Laxus's grin widened, a sharp, predatory expression. Fairy Tale is the strongest guild in Fury. That's because I'm here to protect it. The old man is soft, and his policies are weak. He lets in stray dogs and washed-up runts. His gaze swept over the other guild members, many of whom flinched. But you're not a stray dog. You're a wolf they've put in the middle of the sheep pen. And I, for one, want to see your teeth. He vaulted over the railing, landing on the ground floor with a heavy thud that shook the tables. He was even more imposing up close. A mountain of muscle and contained power. The air around him crackled with latent electricity. Erza is strong, Laxus said, nodding to the scarlet-haired woman. Mira, when she bothers to try, is a monster, but they follow the old man's rules. They have restraint. He took a step towards Naruto's table, his grin never wavering. I don't get the impression you do. I think you're a force of nature. Just like me, and in my experience, Two storms in the same sky always end up clashing. Erza stood up, her expression stern. Laxus, that is enough. He is an ally of this guild. He is under our protection. Quote, protection. Laxus scoffed. He doesn't need your protection. The question is, do we need protection from him? The council thinks he's a plague. Valerius has all but declared war on us because of him. I need to know if the gamble is worth it. I need to know if this wolf is on our side, or if he's just going to eat us all in the end. He stopped directly in front of Naruto, who remained seated, looking up at him. So I'm issuing a formal guild challenge. You and me, one-on-one. We go all out. When the dust settles, we'll know exactly what you are. The guild hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. A formal challenge from Laxus was a rare and terrifying thing. It wasn't a friendly brawl. It was a battle of dominance. Naruto slowly folded the map. He placed it on the table and rose to his feet. He was shorter than Laxus by a good head, but he met the bigger man's gaze with an unnerving stillness. All right, Naruto said, his voice calm. I accept your challenge. He held up a finger. One condition. Name it. Laxus grunted, clearly pleased. We don't do it here, Naruto said, gesturing to the guild hall. You want to see what I'm capable of? We're going to need a lot more space. An hour later, the entire fairy tale guild had migrated to the wide, rocky plains east of Magnolia. It was a desolate area, chosen specifically for S-class mages to spar without fear of leveling the town by accident. The guild members formed a wide, nervous circle, 100 yards back from the two figures who stood facing each other in the center of the plain. The air was thick with anticipation. This was more than a fight, it was a referendum on Naruto's place in their world. Rules are simple, Laxus said, cracking his knuckles, the sound like rocks grinding together. Last one standing wins. Try not to die. Naruto just gave a slight nod. He wasn't wearing his tattered jacket, just his black shirt and orange pants. He looked relaxed, almost casual, which seemed to annoy Laxus even more. Let's see what you've got, alien. Laxus roared, and the battle began. He moved with a speed that belied his size. He was a blur of motion, his fist crackling with yellow electricity. Aimed straight for Naruto's face. Lightning Dragon's iron fist. Naruto's movement was subtler. He didn't dodge so much as he simply wasn't there. He shifted his weight, his body flowing around the attack, and used Laxus's own momentum to guide the punch past his head. As Laxus hurtled by, Naruto's foot shot out in a low sweep. It was a simple, elegant move, but it was executed with blinding speed and perfect timing. Laxus, to his credit, was fast enough to react. He twisted in midair, avoiding the sweep and landing in a crouch, his electrified fist slamming into the ground where Naruto had been. The earth erupted, sending a shower of dirt and superheated rock into the air. Naruto was already 10 feet away, watching, analyzing. Fast, Laxus admitted, standing up with a grin. But you can't dodge forever. He clapped his hands together, and a torrent of lightning bolts shot from his body in all directions. It wasn't a targeted attack, it was an area of effect blast designed to saturate the battlefield. There was nowhere to run. From the crowd, Erza watched with a critical eye. Laxus is testing his reflexes, his threat assessment. He wants to see how he handles overwhelming, unavoidable pressure. Mirajane stood beside her, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. He's about to be surprised. As the lightning descended, Naruto didn't try to outrun it. Instead, he made a simple hand sign. A single shadow clone popped into existence beside him. In perfect sync, both Naruto and his clone began to spin, their hands outstretched. The air around them warped, and a vortex of wind formed, a miniature tornado that acted as a shield. The lightning bolts struck the swirling wall of air and were harmlessly deflected, arcing off into the sky or sizzling against the rocks. The lightning storm subsided. Naruto and his clone stood untouched in the center of a small, smoking crater. Laxus's grin faded, replaced by a look of genuine interest. So the rumors are true. You can make copies of yourself. Cute trick. He inhaled deeply, his chest swelling, and the magic in the air coalesced in his mouth. Lightning Dragon's roar. A massive, concussive beam of pure lightning, a destructive force that could tear through a fortress wall, erupted from his mouth and shot towards Naruto. This time, Naruto didn't defend. He met the attack head-on. Sage mode. The change was instantaneous. The orange pigmentation flared around his eyes. The natural energy of the world flooded into him, and his physical presence seemed to triple. He held up a single hand, and a swirling sphere of blue chakra, far larger and more unstable than a normal one, formed in his palm. Giant Rasengan. He didn't throw it, he met the lightning dragon's roar with it, pushing his attack directly into the path of Laxus's. The collision was apocalyptic. A dome of blinding white and yellow light exploded outward, and the sound of the impact was a physical blow that sent the Watching Guild members staggering back. The ground beneath the point of impact was obliterated, torn apart as the two colossal forces fought for dominance. For a terrifying second, they were perfectly matched. A stalemate of raw power that cracked the very air. Then, Naruto's Rasengan began to grind forward, tearing through the lightning, overpowering it. The beam of electricity shattered, and the Rasengan continued on, slamming into Laxus's chest. The S-class mage was launched backward like a cannonball, tumbling through the air for 50 yards before crashing into the dirt, carving a deep trench in the ground. A stunned silence fell over the plains. Even Natsu was speechless. No one had ever overpowered Laxus's roar like that. Slowly, his clothes torn and smoking, Laxus staggered to his feet. A trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. The arrogant grin was completely gone now. In its place was the feral, deadly serious expression of a dragon that had just been truly wounded for the first time. "All right," Laxus growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. The air around him grew heavy, thick with killing intent. "No more games. You wanted to see my teeth. Fine." The sky above them, which had been clear moments before, began to darken. Clouds swirled into existence, black and angry. Lightning, real lightning, began to arc between them. Laxus was drawing on the very power of the heavens. "He's using dragon force," Erza said, her voice tight with alarm. "Naruto needs to stop him, now." But Naruto didn't move. He stood his ground, watching as Laxus's body began to change. His muscles swelled, and faint, green scales appeared on his arms and face. His teeth elongated into fangs. His magical power skyrocketed, a terrifying, overwhelming presence that dwarfed everything else. Laxus, wreathed in a furious aura of golden lightning, looked like a demigod of the storm. "This is the power of a dragon slayer, alien. Let's see your little tricks handle this." He vanished. He didn't just move fast. He became a literal bolt of lightning, reappearing directly in front of Naruto, his fist aimed at his heart. But Sage Mode was more than just power. It was perception. To Naruto's senses, Laxus wasn't a blur. He could feel the flow of his energy, predict his trajectory, sense the attack before it was even fully launched. Naruto sidestepped the blow, the bolt of lightning that was Laxus's body searing the air where he had been. He retaliated with a punch of his own, infused with senjutsu. The punch connected with Laxus's side, and the resulting shockwave was visible, a ripple in the air. Laxus grunted in pain, the blow bypassing his lightning armor and striking him with the force of a falling mountain. The battle became a maelstrom of golden light and raw physical power. They were no longer just mages or warriors, they were two forces of nature, tearing the landscape apart. Craters were blasted into the earth. Boulders were pulverized into dust. The sound of their blows was a continuous, rolling thunder. Laxus was faster, his attacks more destructive. But Naruto was a master of combat. His senses were perfect. His movements were precise. Every blow he landed was perfectly placed. Every dodge a masterclass in efficiency. He was weathering the storm, enduring the dragon's fury. Finally, Laxus leapt back, breathing heavily, his dragon force flickering. He was burning through his magic at an incredible rate. He knew he had one last attack left. He raised his hand to the sky. Raging bolt, a colossal bolt of lightning, larger and more powerful than anything he had summoned before, descended from the black clouds, aimed directly at Naruto. It was an attack meant not to defeat, but to annihilate. Naruto looked up at the descending pillar of divine judgment. He let out a slow breath. He had seen enough. He had shown respect by meeting Laxus's power with his own. Now, it was time to end it. Kurama, he thought. Let's show him a real storm. Finally, the fox roared in his mind. A new power erupted from Naruto. It wasn't the calm, natural energy of Sage Mode. This was something far more primal, more overwhelming. A torrent of fiery, golden-orange chakra exploded from his body, forming a visible aura that took on the vague shape of a demonic fox. The ground beneath his feet cracked and melted. The sheer pressure of his energy pus. Head back against the descending lightning, slowing its advance. Kurama Chakra Mode. The guild members could only stare in utter, soul-shaking awe. The power they had felt from him before, the power that had defeated a monster and cowed the council, was a flickering candle compared to this raging inferno. Erza's eyes were wide. This was the power the prophecy spoke of. The life force of a sun-drenched world. It was the power of a god. Mirajane's heart hammered in her chest. The demon inside her, which had felt a kinship with Naruto's controlled darkness, was now cowering in the face of this blinding, benevolent, yet absolutely terrifying light. Naruto, now a blazing figure of pure golden energy, looked up at the raging bolt. He formed a Rasengan in his hand, but this one was different. It was infused with the Biju's immense chakra, turning it from blue to a brilliant, sun-like yellow. He didn't meet the lightning bolt. He moved. He was a flash of gold, so fast he seemed to teleport. He appeared above the descending lightning strike, a tiny sun challenging the heavens. He thrust the Biju Rasengan down into the raging bolt. The result was not a collision. It was an consumption. Rasengan didn't just overpower the lightning, it absorbed it, tore it apart, and utterly erased it from existence. The sky cleared instantly, the dark clouds vaporized by the sheer release of energy. Laxus could only stare, his dragon force sputtering out, his mind unable to process what he had just witnessed. Before he could react, Naruto was in front of him, the golden aura gone, his fist cocked back. He was back in his base form. The fight was over. He threw the punch. It stopped a single, hair's breadth from Laxus's face. The air pressure from the halted blow alone was enough to blast Laxus off his feet, sending him skidding back dozens of yards until he finally collapsed onto one knee, utterly spent. Naruto lowered his fist. He stood over the defeated Dragon Slayer, not with triumph, but with a quiet, undeniable authority. The duel was over. He had won. But more than that, he had shown restraint. He had met power with greater power, and then he had met killing intent with mercy. He walked over to the kneeling Laxus and offered a hand. Laxus looked at the outstretched hand, then up at Naruto's calm, blue eyes. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a complex mixture of shock, exhaustion, and a new, grudging respect. He took Naruto's hand and allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The battle had said it all. Later that evening, the guild hall was quieter than usual. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the power they had witnessed had left everyone in a state of contemplative shock. Naruto was no longer just an ally. He was their anchor, their ultimate weapon, a force that put even their strongest S-class mages in the shade. He was sitting at the bar when Laxus approached, sliding onto the stool next to him. Mirajane, moving with a quiet reverence Naruto hadn't seen from her before, placed 2 large mugs of ale in front of them without a word. They drank in silence for a long time. Valerius, Laxus finally said, his voice a low rasp. He's a snake, from one of the founding families. Thinks magic is his birthright. He won't stop until you're in a cage or in the ground. I know, Naruto said, taking a long drink of his ale. He's not your only problem, Laxus continued, looking down into his mug. My old man, he's not fit to lead this guild through a real war. He's soft. He cares too much about his children. It's going to get them all killed one day. Naruto didn't respond. It wasn't his place. Laxus drained his mug and slammed it down on the counter. You're strong. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. He looked at Naruto, his eyes sharp and clear. Don't let that strength be wasted protecting the weak. Use it to make the guild strong. Unfck-withable. Do what the old man can't. It was a strange, backhanded compliment. A piece of advice, and a transfer of responsibility all rolled into one. It was Laxus's way of acknowledging him as an equal, perhaps even a superior. Before Naruto could formulate a reply, the heavy doors of the guild hall creaked open. The sound was loud in the quiet hall, and every head turned. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was large, broad-shouldered, and wore a ragged cloak. As he stepped into the light, they saw his prosthetic left arm and the easy, almost lazy smile on his face. An aura of immense, relaxed power rolled off him, a power that made even Laxus's feel tense and brittle by comparison. It was Gildart's Clive, the ace of fairy tale, returned from a 100-year quest. His eyes scanned the hall, taking in the subdued atmosphere, the patched walls, and the two titans sitting at the bar. His gaze finally settled on Naruto, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He took a long, slow sniff of the air. "Well now," Gildart said, his voice a deep, easygoing rumble that filled the entire hall. He gestured a thumb towards Naruto. "Something tells me I missed a hell of a party." He looked directly at the blonde shinobi, his smile widening. "So you're the one causing all the trouble." Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Scars and Starlight. The Magnolia Flower Festival, the Fantasia floor, was an explosion of life. After days of tension that had felt like a coiled fist in the center of the guild, the celebration was a city-wide exhalation of relief. The streets were thronged with people, the air thick with the scent of 1,000 different SSOMS and the sweet aroma of festival food. Buildings were draped in garlands of glowing moonpetal flowers, and the canals that wound through the city were filled with floating lotuses, each one enchanted to release a soft, melodic chime as it drifted. For Naruto, it was a sensory overload. He had seen festivals in Konoha, but they were often tied to a specific historical event, a commemoration of a victory, or a memorial for the dead. They were joyful, but always carried the weight of memory. This was just joy for the sake of it. A celebration of life itself. He watched from the steps of the Fairy Tale Guild Hall, a silent observer on the edge of a tidal wave of happiness. Gildart's Clive, the man whose power felt as vast and deep as an ocean, clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder, nay, Arlie sending him through the stone steps. "Bit much, isn't it?" The ace of Fairy Tale rumbled, a jovial grin on his face. He held a massive turkey leg in his other hand. "You get used to it. Arn to find a good spot to drink until it gets blurry." He took a massive bite. "Just try not to level anything. I've got that covered." With a wink, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Naruto alone with his thoughts again. He saw the members of the guild scattered through the festivities. Natsu and Gray were engaged in a ridiculously high-stakes dango eating contest, with a fuming Lucy trying to act as referee. Levi was excitedly dragging a bemused Gajeel from one bookstall to another. It was a chaotic, dysfunctional, beautiful family. A part of him, the part that had always been the Lonel. Why Orphan, pressing his face against the glass, felt a sharp pang of belonging. But another, older part, the part that was a general, a leader, and a man impossibly far from home, felt a profound sense of isolation. He pushed off the steps and began to walk, letting the current of the crowd carry him, his destination unplanned. He found himself drawn away from the boisterous main streets, towards the quieter, tree-lined paths that followed the river. The noise of the festival faded to a pleasant hum, and the chimes of the floating lotuses became the dominant sound. He stopped, leaning against the railing of a small, arched bridge, and watched the magical lights dance on the water's surface. "I thought I might find you here." He didn't startle. He had sensed her approach. He turned to see Erza standing there. The sight of her almost took his breath away. Her formidable armor was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant yukata of deep crimson, patterned with white cherry blossoms. Her scarlet hair was pinned up, revealing the graceful line of her neck. She looked less like a warrior queen and more like a woman. A beautiful, and slightly awkward, woman. She carried a small paper bag that smelled of cinnamon and sugar. "Not a fan of crowds?" she asked, her usual commanding tone softened. "I'm better in them when there's something to fight," he admitted with a wry smile. "Peaceful ones are still new territory for me." She nodded in understanding and stood beside him at the railing, her gaze following his out over the water. "Me too," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "For a long time, the only gatherings I knew were lineups for rations or punishments." The words were spoken so plainly, so devoid of self-pity, that they carried an immense weight. Naruto turned to look at her, really look at her. He saw the faint, almost invisible tension in her posture, the practiced stillness of someone who had learned to make themselves small and unnoticeable to survive. The Tower of Heaven, he said. It wasn't a question. Makarov had given him the barest outlines of his new comrades' histories. Erza's shoulders tightened for a fraction of a second before she forced them to relax. Yes, she didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The name itself was a scar. My whole life, Naruto began, turning his gaze back to the water. I had this thing sealed inside me. A monster made of pure hate. Everyone in my village saw it when they looked at me. They didn't see a kid. They saw a demon, a weapon that might go off. Their hate, their fear, it was a cage, just as real as any tower. He pulled up the sleeve of his right arm. Near the elbow was a pale, jagged scar, a relic from a long-forgotten battle. I got this one fighting a man who believed that true peace could only come from absolute despair. He wanted to trap the entire world in a dream, so no one would ever have to feel pain again. He traced the line of the scar with his finger. He wasn't entirely wrong. The world is full of pain. But he was wrong about the dream. You don't find peace by running from the pain. You find it by walking through it, and having people you trust to walk with you when you can't stand on your own. He let his sleeve fall. This is just a scar. The ones they leave on your heart, those are the ones that are hard to heal. Erza was silent for a long time, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with an emotion she rarely allowed herself to show. When he betrayed us, he took everything. Our hope, our freedom, our friends. She looked at her own hand, resting on the railing. He made us build a monument to our own enslavement. I fought, I escaped, but I left people behind. For years, I wore my armor everywhere. It made me feel strong. Safe. She turned her head, her brown eyes meeting his. A single, traitorous tear traced a path down her cheek. But it was just another cage, wasn't it? A way to keep everyone out, so no one could ever hurt me like that again. Naruto didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say, "It wasn't your fault," or, "You're strong." He simply reached out and gently brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was warm, respectful. An acknowledgement of her pain, not an attempt to erase it. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "I don't see a cage when I look at you. I see a warrior who fought her way out." Her breath hitched. The connection that passed between them in that moment was more profound than any clash of steel. It was the silent understanding of two survivors, two people who had been forged into weapons by a cruel world but had somehow managed to hold on to the hearts that beat within the steel. She finally seemed to remember the bag in her hand. Oh, her composure returned, a faint blush on her cheeks. "I brought you something." She held out the bag. "It's a cinnamon beignet. They're a festival specialty." Naruto took it, their fingers brushing. The pastry was warm. "Thank you, Erza." They stood in comfortable silence for a while longer, eating their pastries and watching the lights, the unspoken truths hanging between them, not as a weight, but as the foundation of a new and unexpected bridge. Later that night, as the festival began to wind down, the party inevitably migrated back to the guild hall. The main floor was a disaster of spilled drinks, leftover food, and a few unconscious guild members who had celebrated a little too hard. Most of the others had already drifted off to their homes or rooms upstairs. A small group, however, was lethargically cleaning up, Naruto among them. He felt a sense of duty to help. It was the least he could do for the people who had given him shelter. He was stacking mugs behind the bar when Mirajane approached, a damp cloth in her hand. She moved with her usual easy grace, but her smile was more subdued, more thoughtful than usual. "You're a natural at that," she commented, her voice a soft melody in the quiet hall. "Have you worked in a bar before?" "No," Naruto chuckled, "but I've cleaned up after enough parties." My sensei was enthusiastic about his celebrations. He thought of Jiraiya and a wave of fond sadness washed over him. Mirajane began wiping down the counter, her movements efficient. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clinking of glass and the distant, dying embers of the festival. "Laxus was impressed with you," she said, her back still to him. "He won't say it, of course. But I know him. He hasn't looked at anyone with that kind of respect since Guildarts." "He's strong," Naruto acknowledged. "He fights with everything he has. I can respect that. He fights with lightning, Mirajane said, turning to lean against the counter, her blue eyes seeming to glow in the dim light. I fight with a demon. She paused, her gaze direct and searching. And you fight with a fox. What is that like? Her question was different from any he had ever been asked about Kurama. It wasn't about control, or power, or danger. It was a question of coexistence. A question from someone who understood what it meant to harbor a second, more monstrous self. Naruto stopped what he was doing and leaned against the back of the bar, meeting her gaze. It used to be like having a cage inside me, he said, his voice low. And I was the prisoner, not him. It was a constant battle. His hate would leak out, mix with my own, and make me into something I didn't want to be. He was the source of all my pain, and I hated him for it. He looked at his own hands. But then, during the war, I finally understood. He wasn't just a monster. He had a name. He had his own pain, his own history. He was lonely, just like me. We stopped fighting each other and started fighting together. Now, he smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression. Now he's just a grumpy, old roommate who complains a lot but always has my back. He's my partner. Mirajane listened to every word, her expression rapt. A sad, knowing smile touched her lips. After my sister, after we thought Lizana had died, I couldn't stand it, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The power I had, my Satan soul, it felt like a curse. A monster that had failed to protect the one person I loved most. So I locked it away. I sealed it behind a smile and a pretty dress and pretended it didn't exist. She looked down at her own hands, as if seeing the claws that could sprout from them. But the monster was still there. It's a part of me. Trying to kill it was just killing a part of myself. It took a long time to accept that. To learn that the demon inside me doesn't have to be my enemy. That its strength is my strength. The air between them was charged with a different kind of intimacy than he had shared with Erza. This was the bond of the tamed beast. The understanding of those who had looked into their own personal abyss and made peace with the darkness staring back. He had a monster within him that had become his friend. She had become the monster and was learning to be her own friend. It's not the power that makes you a monster, Naruto said quietly. It's what you choose to do with it. Mirajane looked up, her blue eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you, Naruto, she whispered. The last of the magical fireworks began to bloom in the night sky, great, silent peonies of light that painted the clouds in hues of sapphire and gold. Naruto, Erza, and Mirajane found themselves standing together on the guild's second-floor balcony, watching the grand finale. The emotional currents of the evening swirled around them, creating a comfortable, profound silence. They were no longer just a team thrown together by circumstance. They were three individuals who had seen the scars of the others and had not looked away. It's funny, Mirajane said, her voice a soft murmur on the night air. The council went to all that trouble, ripped you from your world, risked a war with their own allies, all based on some dusty old prophecy. She shook her head. They thought they could just order a new generation of heroes into existence, like placing an order for new swords. Erza, leaning against the railing beside her, nodded. They saw a problem and what they believed was the only solution. A strategic necessity. Her voice was laced with a faint, bitter irony. They never considered the people involved. They never considered the heart. The unspoken subject of the prophecy, the reason they had all been brought together, hung between them. The breeding contract, the biological imperative, it seemed so absurd now, so laughably clinical in the face of the genuine, complex emotions that had taken root between them. Naruto watched a golden firework burst, scattering 1,000 glittering embers across the dark canvas of the sky. My whole life, people have been trying to decide my destiny for me, he said, his voice quiet but clear. The village elders, my enemies, even prophecies. They all had a plan for Naruto Uzumaki. He turned his head, looking at the two women who were now inextricably linked to his fate. I learned a long time ago that destiny isn't something that's written for you. It's something you write yourself. Page by page, choice by choice. His meaning was clear. The council's plan, the prophecy, it was all irrelevant. Whatever happened next, whatever their relationship became, be it friends, comrades, or something more, it would be their choice, and theirs alone. Not a duty to be fulfilled, but a path to be walked together. Erza met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw no soldier. No titan of fairy tale. He saw a woman, strong and vulnerable, offering him a look of profound gratitude and trust. Mirajane simply smiled, but this smile was different from all the others. It was open, real, and held a universe of unspoken understanding. The pressure was gone. In its place was possibility. They were a silent trio, silhouetted against the dying fireworks, a sun and his two chosen stars. Finally aligned not by fate, but by choice. But they were not alone. Miles away, on the clock tower that overlooked the entire city, a figure knelt in the shadows. He was clad in a featureless white uniform, his face obscured by a porcelain mask. In his hands, he held a complex lacrima device, a lens of polished crystal aimed directly at the fairy tale guild hall. The device hummed with a cold, dispassionate energy. An image of the three on the balcony was projected onto the lacrima's surface, annotated with glowing runes that analyzed energy levels, emotional states, and spatial coordinates. A voice, distorted and metallic, emanated from a speaker on the figure's wrist. It was the calm, precise voice of Lord Valerius. "Report, Purifier 1. The masked figure spoke, his own voice flat and devoid of emotion. The asset's emotional state has stabilized. His integration with the primary targets, Scarlet and Strauss, is proceeding at an accelerated rate. Emotional bonds have been confirmed. This complicates the psychological aspects of the extraction protocol." There was a pause on the other end. "Complicates, but does not prevent," Valerius's voice returned, laced with a cold resolve. "His emotional attachments will become his greatest weakness. The festival provides the perfect cover. The city is crowded, chaotic. Optimal conditions. Prepare your team. We proceed with the gambit at dawn." "Understood, my lord," the purifier responded. He lowered the device, the image of the three friends vanishing. He rose to his feet, a ghost in the starlight, and melted back into the shadows of the city, leaving the heroes to their moment of peace, completely unaware that the cage was already closing around them. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Purifier's Gambit. Dawn broke over Magnolia with a fragile, pearlescent light. The city was sleeping a deep, exhausted sleep, dreaming of flowers and fireworks. The last of the festival lanterns had flickered out, and a quiet, contented peace had settled over the streets, as soft and thick as a blanket of fresh snow. In his small room above the guild hall, Naruto was awake. He sat on the edge of his cot, not from any lingering nightmare, but from a sudden, jarring silence. It was a void where a sound should have been. For 2 days, he had been subconsciously cataloging the constant, low-level hum of Ethernano that saturated the town. It was the background radiation of this world, the gentle thrum of life and magic. And now, it was gone. The air was dead, mute. "Kit," Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, instantly alert. "Something is wrong. The energy in the air, it's being choked." Naruto was already on his feet, pulling on his pants and boots. His senses, honed by a lifetime of war, were screaming. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was artificial, a suppression, like holding a pillow over someone's face. He threw the window open and vaulted onto the guild's roof, his bare feet making no sound on the tiles. He crouched at the peak, his eyes scanning the sleeping city below. Everything looked normal. A baker's chimney was beginning to smoke. A few stray cats prowled the alleys. But the feeling was undeniable. A cold, sterile blanket had been thrown over Magnolia, and it was suffocating the magic. From his vantage point, he saw the first signs. Small, almost invisible flickers of light from a dozen different rooftops. All activating in perfect, chilling synchronicity. They were devices, he realized. Lacrima crystals of some kind, arranged in a precise geometric pattern around the city's core. With the fairy tale guild hall at its absolute center. They were the source of the suppression field. The first explosion was not a chaotic blast. It was a precise, targeted strike. A spear of white-hot light shot down from the sky and slammed into the guild's primary communication lacrima on the roof, shattering it into a million useless shards. The sound was a sharp, piercing crack, like a celestial whip. In the next second, the city erupted. Coordinated explosions rocked the north and south gates, sealing the main roads. Another blast took out the railway bridge. They weren't trying to destroy the city. They were isolating it, caging it. The front doors of the guild hall burst open below him. He didn't need to look to know who it was. He felt their energy signatures, muted but familiar. He dropped from the roof, landing silently beside them. Erza stood in her standard Heart Cruise armor, a grim, battle-ready light in her eyes. Mirajane was beside her, her sweet smile a chilling death mask. Her hands already glowing faintly with a suppressed violet energy. They hadn't needed a wake-up call. Like him, they were warriors. They had felt the silence and known it for what it was. The drawing of a breath before the killing blow. "What do you see?" Erza asked, her voice low and tight. "A coordinated attack," Naruto said, his gaze sweeping the street. "They've set up a perimeter, established a magic suppression field, and are isolating us. Professional, military." As he spoke, the first of them appeared. They came not from the main roads, but from the alleys, over the rooftops. Rappelling down the sides of buildings on shimmering wires of light. They moved with a fluid, disciplined grace. There were dozens of them, all clad in the same featureless white uniforms and motionless porcelain masks he had seen on the clock tower. The purifiers. They carried no swords or staffs. Their weapons were sleek, lacrima-powered carbines and strange, circular devices on their wrists. They fanned out, taking strategic positions, their movements a symphony of silent, practiced efficiency. "Enemies of Fairy Tail," a voice roared from inside the guild. "You picked the wrong house to mess with." Natsu, his fists already blazing, though the flames looked weaker, more sluggish than usual, charged out the front door, followed closely by Gray and Gajil. The rest of the guild was right behind them. A tide of furious mages pouring into the street. The battle for Magnolia had begun. It was immediately, terrifyingly clear that this was no ordinary dark guild. The purifiers fought not with spells, but with tactics. When Natsu unleashed a fire dragon's roar, two purifiers in front raised their wrist devices, projecting a shimmering hexagonal barrier that absorbed the blast completely. As he recoiled in shock, three others opened fire from a rooftop, their carbines shooting bolts of concentrated energy that forced him back, peppering the ground around his feet. Gray slammed his hands on the ground, trying to create a wall of ice. The spell was slow to form in the dampened air, and when it rose, it was brittle, almost slushy. A single purifier shattered it with a well-aimed shot. They were systematically dismantling Fairy Tail's magic. "Their technology," Erza said, her eyes narrowed as she deflected an energy bolt with her gauntlet. "It's designed to counter us specifically. Then we adapt," Mirajane said, a predatory glint in her eyes. "If they want to suppress our magic, we'll give them something else." With a guttural cry, she transformed. Her Satan soul form ripped into existence. The sheer force of her internal power momentarily overwhelming the field around her. She took to the sky, a demonic angel of vengeance. "They have a command vessel," Naruto pointed towards the sky. A large, flat-bottomed airship, powered by a massive, glowing lacrima, had just uncloaked itself above the center of town. "It's the source of the field. We take that down, our friends get their power back." "A sound strategy," Erza agreed. "But they will have it heavily defended. That's why you two are going to make a very loud, very obvious distraction," Naruto said, a feral grin spreading across his face. "Draw their fire. I'll handle the ship." Without waiting for a reply, he created 24 shadow clones. They exploded into the street, a chaotic wave of orange and black that immediately threw the purifiers, disciplined formations into disarray. The clones were not as strong as the original, but they were a perfect disruptive force. Erza didn't hesitate. "Requip. Purgatory armor." The massive, black, spiked armor materialized around her, a suit built for nothing but overwhelming destructive power. She hefted her huge, spiked mace and charged, a one-woman siege engine. The purifiers turned their fire on her, their energy bolts splashing harmlessly against the thick demonic plate. She was a walking fortress, drawing the attention of every enemy on the ground. Above, Mirajane became a storm of dark energy. She didn't use large, easily absorbed spells. She flew like a missile, using her demonic speed and strength, engaging the purifiers on the rooftops in brutal, close-quarters combat. Claws and fists were not magic they could dampen. With the enemy's attention focused on the knight and the demon, the real Naruto became a ghost. He moved through the chaos, a blur of motion that the purifiers, targeting systems couldn't track. He ran up the side of the tallest building in the square, his feet clinging to the stone, and launched himself into the air, soaring towards the command ship. He landed on its flat deck with a roll, coming up in a crouch. A dozen purifiers, the elite guard, were waiting for him. They opened fire instantly. Naruto moved like water, weaving between the bolts of energy, the deck of the airship his own personal training ground. He dismantled them with the same brutal efficiency they had used on his friends, a whirlwind of kicks, punches, and throws. He reached the central power core, the massive lacrima generating the suppression field. It was protected by a final, crackling energy shield. He didn't have time for subtlety. He brought his hands together, pulling on the deep reserves of power that Kurama offered. Biju Bomb. The small, dense sphere of pure, compressed positive and negative chakra formed in front of his mouth. It was an attack that warped the air around it, a miniature black hole of destructive potential. The remaining purifiers on the ship could only stare in horror. He fired. The shield, the lacrima core, and a good third of the entire airship were simply erased from existence in a silent, world-shaking explosion of light and power. As the ship listed, beginning its slow, crippled descent, the suffocating pressure over Magnolia vanished. The air once again hummed with the vibrant energy of Ethernano. Down below, the effect was immediate. Natsu's flames erupted, twice as large and 3 times as hot. Gray's ice constructs became massive, intricate, and deadly. The tide of the battle turned in a single, roaring instant. The disciplined purifiers suddenly found themselves facing the full, unrestrained fury of the Fairy Tail Guild. Their formations broke. Their retreat was a frantic, chaotic scramble. Naruto stood on the falling ship, a grim satisfaction on his face. The main assault was broken. But it had all been too easy. Too straightforward. Valerius was a snake, not a sledgehammer. This frontal assault, it was a diversion. His eyes widened in realization. He was isolated, exposed, and he had just expended a massive amount of chakra. He felt a presence behind him. Not with his normal senses, but with Sage Mode's perception of life force. It was cold, empty, a void in the shape of a man. He spun around just as a figure emerged from a shimmer of cloaking magic. It was the masked purifier from the clock tower, Purifier 1. He stood calmly on the tilting deck, a strange, silver gauntlet on his right hand humming with an energy that made Naruto's skin crawl. Impressive, the purifier said, his voice a filtered, toneless monotone. You have destroyed 1 billion joules worth of council hardware. Lord Valerius will be displeased. I'm sure he'll get over it, Naruto retorted, dropping into a fighting stance. No, the purifier said. He won't. He lunged. His speed was incredible, matching Naruto's own. Naruto met his charge with a chakra-infused punch. Just before his fist connected, the silver gauntlet on the purifier's arm flared with a sickly, gray light. The vibrant blue chakra coating Naruto's fist flickered and died, and his punch landed with the force of a normal human's. The purifier sidestepped the weak blow and slammed the palm of his gauntlet into Naruto's chest. It wasn't a physical impact. Naruto felt a horrifying sensation, as if a siphon had been attached directly to his soul. His chakra recoiled, his connection to Kurama flickered, a wave of profound weakness washed over him. He stumbled back, gasping. My gauntlet is a unique application of null anima magic, the purifier explained, advancing slowly. It does not block or deflect energy. It unravels it. It deconstructs the very formula of your chakra, and returns it to the ether. Against me, you are just a man. Naruto gritted his teeth and formed a Rasengan. It swirled into existence, but it was unstable, flickering like a dying light bulb. He thrust it forward. The purifier didn't even try to dodge. He simply held up his gauntlet. The gray light pulsed, and the Engen dissolved into nothingness a foot from his hand. All of your tricks, the purifier said, his voice laced with the cold satisfaction of a scientist proving a theory, are now useless. You are the plague, and I am the cure. He charged again. Naruto was forced into a desperate taijutsu battle on a tilting, falling airship. Every time he tried to enhance a blow with chakra, the gauntlet would nullify it. His movements felt sluggish, his impacts weak. The purifier, meanwhile, was a master of close-quarters combat, his strikes precise and brutal. A sharp kick sent Naruto staggering back towards the edge of the broken deck. He was being systematically dismantled. He was losing. Below, Erza had just finished shattering a purifier barricade when she looked up. She saw the falling ship, and the two figures locked in a desperate battle on its edge. She saw Naruto stumble, clearly in trouble. A cold fury she hadn't felt since the Tower of Heaven seized her. Mirajane, she yelled, her voice a clarion call over the battlefield. Naruto is in trouble, with me. She didn't wait for an answer. She re-equipped into her flight armor, a suit that greatly increased her speed, and shot towards the falling airship like a crimson comet. A moment later, a demonic shadow followed, moving even faster. The purifier leader had Naruto on the ropes. He had just disarmed him and was preparing the final blow with the Null Anima Gauntlet. A direct strike to the head that would likely leave him comatose. "You are a contamination," the purifier intoned, raising his hand. "And the purge is..." He never got to finish the sentence. A silver blur shot past his head, and his porcelain mask split in two with a sharp crack. It fell away to reveal a stern, scarred face, his eyes wide with shock. Erza had arrived, her sword swinging in a silent, deadly arc. She landed between Naruto and the purifier, her sword held in a reverse grip. "Get away from him." Before the purifier could react to the new threat, Mirajane slammed into him from above. Her claws tearing through the back of his uniform, her demonic strength driving him down to the deck with bone-jarring force. The purifier leader, a man who had perfectly countered a demigod-level threat, now found himself pinned between a master swordswoman and a physical demon. His specialized weapon was useless against pure, unadulterated melee fury. He blasted Mirajane off him with a burst of kinetic energy from one of his other devices, but Erza was already on him, her blade a whirlwind of strikes that forced him onto the defensive. He was skilled, but Erza was a prodigy. A master of 100 different sword styles. Freed from the gauntlet's oppressive aura, Naruto felt his chakra roar back to life. He saw Erza and Mirajane fighting for him, protecting him. A fierce, protective fire blazed in his chest. He created a single clone. The clone dropped to the deck and began gathering natural energy, while the real Naruto charged forward, joining the fray. The purifier was now facing 3 opponents on a battlefield that was rapidly plummeting towards the city. The fight was short and brutal. The trio moved with the seamless, instinctual synergy. Why they had discovered fighting the beast in the sea caves. Erza created openings, Mirajane exploited them with overwhelming force, and Naruto delivered the final, decisive blow. A simple, devastating Rasengan to the purifier's chest that blasted him through the deck and sent him hurtling towards the streets below. They landed on a rooftop just as the wreckage of the command ship crashed into a deserted plaza with a deafening roar. They watched as the purifier leader picked himself up from the rubble, his body broken, but his will intact. He looked up at them, a strange, fanatical light in his eyes. "Fools," he spat, his voice no longer filtered. "You think you're preventing the end." He coughed, blood trickling from his lips. "You're a key, and the purge is the only thing that can stop the lock from opening." He reached inside his tattered uniform. Naruto's eyes widened, recognizing the motion. "Get down." The purifier pulled out a small, black orb. "For the purity of the world," he yelled. He crushed it in his hand. There was no explosion, just an implosion of blinding white light. When it faded, he was gone. Not even ash remained, just his final, cryptic words, hanging in the smoke-filled air. Naruto stood on the rooftop, flanked by Erza and Mirajane. Below them, the last of the purifiers were being rounded up by the triumphant members of Fairy Tail. The city was saved. They had won. But as he looked out at the rising sun, at the smoke and the destruction, all Naruto could feel was a cold, creeping dread. A key, a lock, a purge. Valerius's plan was far more complex than a simple abduction, and they had just unwittingly played their part in it. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Ruins. The victory was a sour, metallic taste in their mouths. The city of Magnolia was safe. The last of Valerius's fanatical purifiers either captured or having taken their own lives with the same chilling finality as their leader. But as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows from the wreckage of the command ship, An unsettling quiet descended upon the Fairy Tale Guild Hall. The usual morning brawls and raucous laughter were absent, replaced by the grim business of cleaning up, tending to the wounded, and talking in hushed, worried tones. The captured purifiers were useless. They were zealots, every last one of them. They sat in the magic-proof cells beneath the guild, staring at the walls with empty eyes, refusing food, water, and interrogation. They would occasionally mutter a single phrase, a mantra of their twisted faith, for the purity of the world. They were soldiers in a holy war, and their god was Lord Valerius. The focus of the guild's considerable intelligence assets, namely, Levi McGarden, was on the technology salvaged from the battlefield. In a corner of the main hall, surrounded by a fortress of books and scrolls, Levi worked with a frantic intensity, her solid script magic bringing diagrams and analytical runes to life in the air around her. He was carefully disassembling a null anima gauntlet, the very weapon that had almost defeated Naruto. Naruto, Erza, and Mirajane sat at a nearby table, a silent, exhausted triumvirate. The events of the morning played over and over in their minds. The precision of the attack. The leader's final, cryptic words. A key and a lock, Naruto said, breaking the long silence. He rubbed his chest where the gauntlet had struck him. A phantom ache still lingering there. He said, I was the key. What does that mean? And what is the purge? Erza mused, her brow furrowed in concentration. He spoke of it as if it were a solution. The purge is the only thing that can stop the lock from opening. It sounds like Valerius has his own plan for dealing with the anomaly, Mirajane said, her voice soft but laced with an icy dread. A plan that involves erasing you from the equation. Their conversation was cut short by a sudden gasp of excitement from Levi. I've found something. This is incredible. They were at her side in an instant. Levi was pointing at the internal chassis of the gauntlet. Etched into the core lacrima, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a string of microscopic runes. It's a coordinate system, Levi explained, her eyes wide with academic fervor. But it's ancient. Predates the founding of the council. I've only ever seen it in the oldest texts. She began rapidly writing in the air, her script magic translating the archaic symbols into a map of fury that shimmered above the table. A single point of light pulsed in the desolate, frozen expanse of the continent's northern frontier. Far beyond the Ice Trail Mountains. What's out there? Gray asked, joining the group, his shirt already mysteriously missing. Nothing, Levi said, her excitement tempered by confusion. It's a region known as the Silent Lands. It's a vast, frozen wasteland. According to the records, it was the site of a cataclysmic battle during the Age of the Dragons. Nothing grows there. No one lives there. A perfect place to hide a secret, Naruto concluded, his eyes fixed on the pulsing light on the map. The Purifier leader, his mission wasn't just to capture me. It was a gambit, a calculated risk. What if the primary goal of their attack was to weaken the anomaly's seal? A cold realization dawned on the faces around the table. The command ship, Erza breathed. Its power core. It wasn't just powering the suppression field. A magical explosion of that magnitude, it could have sent a shockwave through the entire continent's magical strata. And your Biju bomb, Mirajane added, looking at Naruto. They goaded you into using your strongest attack. What if they were measuring it? Or what if its unique energy was the final piece they needed to destabilize the seal? The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The attack on Magnolia wasn't a failure, it was a success. They had baited the trap, and Naruto, in his effort to protect his friends, had sprung it. Valerius hadn't just been trying to abduct him, he had been using him. Their technology pointed us to these ruins for a reason, Naruto said, his voice hard as iron. Either it's a trap, or it's where we'll find the answers to what Valerius is really planning. Either way, we have to go. Then we go together, Erza declared, her decision absolute. This sounds like it could get messy, Gray said with a grin. Count me in. You'll need support, a small voice added. Wendy Marvell, with Carla perched on her shoulder, stepped forward, her expression determined. If anyone gets hurt, I can help. Lucy Hartfilia, who had been listening with growing dread, took a deep breath. And you'll need someone who can read ancient languages. My mother taught me a lot about pre-council dialects. I'm coming too. And so, the team was formed. Naruto, Erza, and Mirajane, the core of the mission, supported by Gray's versatile magic, Lucis' intellect, and Wendy's healing. It was a small, elite strike force, heading into the unknown on the trail of a madman. The journey north was a grueling, 2-day trek by magical carriage, then by foot through the treacherous Ice Trail Mountains. The landscape steadily bled its color, shifting from verdant greens and browns to stark whites and grays. The air grew thin and bitingly cold. The constant, ambient hum of Ethernano that Naruto had grown accustomed to became faint, then faded almost completely. The silent lands lived up to their name. They traveled with a grim purpose, the usual light-hearted banter of the fairy tale mages replaced by a focused silence. During a brief rest, huddled around a small, magical fire that seemed to struggle for life in the thin air, Gray looked over at Naruto. "That power you used," he said, breaking the quiet, "against Laxus, and on that airship. It's something else." Naruto just nodded, staring into the flames. "When I fight, I'm taking something that's already there, water, air, and giving it a form," Gray continued, a rare, introspective look on his face. "But it feels like you're creating the power from inside yourself. Like you're a well that never runs dry." "Something like that," Naruto said. He appreciated the attempt at connection. It was Gray's way of showing the respect he'd earned, moving past simple rivalry. "Be careful with it," Lucy added, her voice trembling slightly as she hugged her knees. "Valerius, he doesn't just want to control your power. He's afraid of it, and people do terrible things when they're afraid." Her words hung in the cold air, a simple truth that resonated with them all. On the third day, they found it. Guided by the coordinates Levi had provided, they arrived at a vast, frozen plain, swept by a relentless, moaning wind. In the center of the plain, half buried in snow and ice, stood the ruins. They were not the remnants of a castle or a city. It was a single, massive structure, a great, circular ziggurat of black, basalt-like stone that seemed to absorb the faint light from the sky. The architecture was alien, with sharp, angular lines and surfaces covered in runes that pulsed with a faint, dying light. It felt ancient, impossibly so, like a tomb for a forgotten god. "This place," Wendy whispered, her eyes wide. "The air is so heavy. It feels sad." She was right. The ruins radiated a profound sense of loss, a silent, eternal scream of warning that echoed across the millennia. The entrance was a massive, triangular archway, sealed not by a door, but by a shimmering barrier of pale blue light. "A magical seal," Erza observed, placing a hand on the barrier. "It's incredibly old, but still active." "Let me try," Lucy said, stepping forward. She pulled out a golden key. "Open, Gate of the Maiden, Virgo." The celestial spirit appeared in a flash of light. But as Lucy tried to command her to dig under the barrier, Virgo simply looked at her apologetically. "I am sorry, Princess. The magic of this place is wrong. It feels like it would reject my own. I cannot pass." Naruto stepped up to the barrier, his brow furrowed. He placed a hand on its surface. It was cool to the touch, and it resisted his chakra, but there was a familiarity to it. A resonance. He closed his eyes and entered sage mode. The world resolved into a web of energy signatures. He could feel the lines of power that made up the seal, and he could feel a deeper, more familiar energy within the ruins themselves, the same kind of natural energy he drew upon. It was faint, almost fossilized, but it was there. This place had once been teeming with life. "It's a seal of natural energy," Naruto said, his eyes snapping open. "It's keyed to reject constructed magic, like yours." He looked at his own hand. "But not this." He channeled a small amount of pure, inted senjutsu chakra into his palm and pressed it against the barrier. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ancient runes on the archway flared to life, glowing with a brilliant golden light. The barrier rippled, dissolved, and vanished, granting them entry. The interior of the ziggurat was a single, massive, circular chamber. The ceiling soared into darkness, and the walls were covered, from floor to ceiling, in a continuous, breathtaking mural. It was carved in deep relief, the figures depicted with a stark, emotional clarity. It was a story, a history, a final, desperate message from a dead civilization. They started at the beginning, a section of the wall depicting a vibrant, thriving world, trees pulsing with light, people weaving spells as easily as breathing. This is the world before, Lucy whispered, her hand hovering over the carvings. They followed the mural. The next panel was one of terror. A shape of pure darkness, a being of jagged edges and hungry emptiness, the Imus anomaly, descended from a star-filled sky. Where it touched the world, the vibrant carvings turned flat and lifeless, the light extinguished. The next panels showed a desperate war. Mages, dragons, and great spirits fought against the void creature, but the mural showed their magic being drawn from them, their bodies turning to dust as the creature fed. They couldn't fight it, Grace said, his voice grim. It just ate everything they threw at it. Then they came to a new section. It depicted a grand ritual, a circle of desperate-looking mages pouring all of their remaining life force into a complex spell. At the center of the spell, a gateway opened, and a figure stepped through. He was carved simply, but his form was wreathed in an aura of stylized, radiating lines, like the sun. "That's you," Mirajane said, looking at Naruto, the warrior from the sun-drenched world. Naruto stared at the carving of his ancient predecessor, a strange feeling of displaced kinship washing over him. But it was the final panel, the largest and most complex, that held the truth. It showed the Sun Warrior, not with a woman, not siring a child, but standing between two other figures. One figure was a woman in ornate armor, 1,000 swords swirling around her in a perfect halo, a perfect representation of Erza's heaven's wheel. The other figure was androgynous, its form shifting, one arm a demonic claw, a wing sprouting from its back, the very essence of Mirajane's takeover magic. And the three of them were not touching. Instead, radiant lines of energy were flowing from their bodies, gold from the Sun Warrior, silver from the Sword Maiden, and violet from the Soul Shifter. These three strands of power were weaving together in front of them, twisting into an impossibly complex, tri-pointed knot of pure light. A seal. This seal was being thrust forward, not by one of them, but by all three in unison, into the heart of the cowering anomaly. Lucy was tracing the runes beneath the carving, her fingers trembling. The words, the council's translation was wrong. So wrong. Her voice was a choked whisper. The rune they translated as sire, or bloodline, it can mean that, in a later dialect. But here, in this older context, it means source, or confluence. She looked up at them, her eyes wide with the sheer magnitude of their discovery. It never said he had to create a new generation. It said he was one of three sources. That a new generation of magic had to be born from the confluence of their three powers. She pointed at the knot of light in the carving. That's the Trinity seal. It's not a person. It's a technique, a fusion of your three unique energies, the sun, the sword, and the soul. The truth settled over them, shattering a reality they had all been forced to accept. Relief was the first emotion, a dizzying, liberating wave. Erza looked at Naruto, a profound weight lifting from her shoulders. The duty she had been prepared to perform, the violation she had steeled herself to endure, had all been a lie. Mirajane let out a shaky breath, a genuine, tearful smile gracing her lips. They were not broodmares. They were pillars. But the relief was swiftly followed by a new, even heavier burden. A fusion of our powers, Naruto said, looking at his own hands, then at Erza and Mirajane. My chakra, your requip, your takeover, they're fundamentally different. How are we supposed to combine them into a single technique? The prophecy had not demanded a sacrifice of their bodies, but of their very beings. It required a harmony, a synergy so perfect, that their disparate powers could become one. The pressure of that task, of mastering a magic that had never before existed, was immense. The fate of the world rested not on a biological act, but on their ability to achieve a perfect, unprecedented unity. It was in that moment of profound revelation, as they stood staring at the ancient truth, that the ruins began to tremble. It started as a low, deep vibration in the stone beneath their feet. A fine dust sifted down from the shadowed ceiling. The faint light in the runes on the walls flickered wildly. Earthquake, Gray yelled, struggling to keep his balance. No, Naruto said, his sage mode senses flaring to life, screaming a silent, terrified warning. He looked to the south, back in the direction of the continent's heartland. Its energy, a massive surge of it, cold and hungry. Wendy gasped, her face paling. The seal, I can feel it from here. It's It's cracking. Far to the south, buried deep beneath the earth in its dimensional prison, the Animus anomaly. Weakened by the purifiers, Gambit and stirred by the echoes of ancient magic in the northern ruins, began to wake up. A massive surge of dark, corrupting energy erupted from the seal's location. A wave of pure void that rolled across the continent, invisible to most, but a soul-shaking tremor to those sensitive enough to feel it. The lock, which Valerius had so desperately wanted to keep shut, was beginning to open, and the key was standing in a forgotten ruin, just now realizing the true nature of the war he had been summoned to fight. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Corrupted Crusade. The energy surge from the weakened seal was a silent, invisible tsunami that washed over the continent of Fury. To the average person, it was nothing more than a sudden, inexplicable chill in the air. A fleeting sense of unease that was just as quickly forgotten. But to the mages of the world, it was a cataclysm. Lacrima crystals across the kingdom flickered and dimmed. Spells fizzled, their power choked by the wave of void energy. In the halls of the Magic Council, ancient warning runes, dormant for a millennium, blazed to life, their violent crimson light painting the marble halls in the color of blood. Panic was a contagion, and it spread through the ranks of the council faster than any fire. The chairman, old and frail, seemed to age a decade in a single hour. The members shouted, casting blame, proposing desperate, contradictory plans. Their orderly, bureaucratic world had been shattered by a primal, existential terror they were completely unequipped to handle. It was into this cauldron of fear and chaos that Lord Valerius stepped, not as a panicked member, but as a savior. He moved through the frantic crowds with a serene, unshakable calm, his voice a beacon of reason in the storm. "Gentlemen, please," he called out, his amplified voice silencing the chamber. "This is a moment for strength, not for fear. The anomaly has stirred, yes. The seal has weakened. This is the very crisis I warned you of." He ascended to the chairman's podium, his presence so commanding that no one thought to stop him. He looked out at the sea of terrified faces, his expression one of profound, sorrowful resolve. "Master Makarov's sentimental foolishness and his reliance on an unstable, foreign entity have failed us," Valerius declared, his voice ringing with righteous conviction. "Their reckless actions have not contained the threat, they have provoked it. They have accelerated the very doom they promised to prevent." A murmur of agreement rippled through the council. They were looking for a scapegoat, and Valerius was giving them one on a silver platter. "But I did not sit idle while they gambled with our fate," he continued, his voice rising in power. "I pursued a different path, a more certain solution." He produced a black, obsidian scroll, sealed with a silver lock. "While they were chasing prophecies in the frozen wastes, I was unearthing the original, unredacted records of the first sealing. And I discovered the truth they conveniently ignore. The anomaly cannot be contained forever. A seal is a temporary measure. It is a wound that will always, eventually, fester." He held up the scroll. The ancients had a final contingency. A forbidden ritual, not to seal the anomaly, but to master it. To bind its limitless, consuming power to a worthy vessel. A will strong enough to wield the void itself, and use that power to perform a great and final purge. To scour the world of all magical corruption, to create a new era of purity and strength. He was no longer just a politician. He was a prophet, a messiah revealing a terrible, glorious new gospel. The desperate council members, adrift in their fear, clung to his words like a life raft. "The time for half measures is over," Valerius boomed. "The council, in its current state, is paralyzed. In this time of ultimate crisis, we need a single, guiding hand. A will of iron to do what must be done." He looked directly at the trembling chairman. "I move for a vote of no confidence. Under the Articles of Emergency Succession, I ask you to grant me supreme, temporary authority as Lord Protector of Fury." It was a coup, conducted not with swords, but with perfectly chosen words aimed at the heart of their fear. The vote was a landslide. The council, in its terror, abdicated its power completely, handing it to the one man who seemed to have a plan. Miles away, at the site of the weakening seal, a desolate, magically scarred crater in the middle of the Bellum Plains, Valerius arrived. He was no longer clad in his white council robes, but in black, runic armor. He was alone, but for a handful of his most loyal, masked purifiers who formed a silent, protective circle around him. The Air above the crater was visibly distorting, shimmering with a purple-black haze of raw, corrupting energy. The ground was littered with the mutated forms of animals and plants that had been twisted by the anomaly's leaking power. The Trinity seal of which the fools now know. It is a gamble, Valerius said, his voice quiet, speaking more to himself than to his men. It seeks harmony with a chaotic force. It is a child's wish for a monster to become a friend. I offer a more realistic solution. Not harmony, dominion. He knelt at the edge of the crater, placing the obsidian scroll on the ground. He unsealed it, revealing the complex, terrifying ritual within. It was a maelstrom of dark magic, a diagram that seemed to writhe on the page. They believe the anomaly is a mindless beast, Valerius whispered, a fanatical light in his eyes. But it is not. It is hunger. It is purpose. All it lacks is a mind to guide it, a will to give it shape. He sliced his palm with a ritual dagger, letting his blood drip onto the scroll. The runes flared to life, a hungry, violet light. He began the incantation, his voice a low, resonant chant that seemed to suck the very warmth from the air. He was not offering himself as a jailer. He was offering himself as a host, a partner. He was opening the door to the cage and inviting the monster to a feast, with his own soul as the main course, confident he could devour it first. The ground began to shake violently. The haze above the crater coalesced, swirling into a vortex of pure, starless night. From its depths, a presence of infinite hunger and inscient malice focused on the kneeling man. It had been sealed for millennia, a mindless parasite. Now, a vessel with ambition, with a will, with a glorious vision of a purified world, was offering itself. A tendril of living darkness shot down from the vortex and pierced Valerius's chest. He screamed, a sound of both unimaginable agony and ecstatic triumph. His body convulsed, lifted into the air. The black armor melted and reformed, flowing over his skin like liquid night. His silver hair turned bone white, and his pale blue eyes began to glow with the same terrifying, violet light as the mutated beasts, as the anomaly itself. The power of the void poured into him, and his own will, his fanatical vision of a perfect, pure world, met it, battled it, and forged a terrible, unholy union. The screaming stopped. He floated back down to the ground, no longer entirely human. He was a god in the making, a herald for the end of the world as they knew it. The anomaly was no longer just a sealed threat. It now had a face, a voice, and a terrifying purpose. The news of Valerius's coup reached the team as they were making their frantic journey back from the northern ruins. A battered communication lacrima, carried by a messenger from a guild on the frontier, delivered Makarov's desperate, furious message. The council had fallen. Valerius was in control, and a state of emergency had been declared, branding Fairy Tail as a rogue element, and Naruto Uzumaki as a Class SS threat to be captured or eliminated on sight. They were no longer just a team on a mission. They were outlaws. They arrived back at the guild hall to find it transformed. It was no longer a place of parties and brawls. It was a war room. Maps covered the tables. Guild members moved with a quiet, grim purpose, reinforcing the building's defenses. Stockpiling supplies. In the center of it all stood Makarov, his expression harder and more resolute than Naruto had ever seen it. He was a guild master preparing to lead his family into a war against their own government. A fragile, desperate alliance was quickly formed. Messages were sent via trusted channels to other guilds, Lamia Scale, Blue Pegasus, even the Notori. Owsley Neutral Sabretooth, warning them of Valerius's madness. A few moderate members of the council who had escaped the capital before Valerius sealed it arrived at Fairy Tail's doorstep, seeking sanctuary and offering what little intelligence they had. Fairy Tail was no longer just a guild. It was the heart of the resistance. But all their hopes rested on one, single, seemingly impossible task. In the guild's vast, underground training chamber, Naruto, Erza, and Mirajane stood facing each other. The weight of their new reality was a crushing physical presence. The fate of their world, their friends, their very existence, rested on them mastering a form of magic that had never been performed before. The mural showed a confluence, Levi said, standing at a safe distance with a dozen ancient texts floating around her. A weaving of 3 distinct energy types. We have to figure out how to do that without, exploding. They began. The first attempt was a disaster. All right, Naruto said, trying to take charge. My chakra is the core. It's life energy. You two need to connect to it, then overlay your magic. He held out his hands, a calm, steady stream of blue chakra flowing from them. Erza, concentrating intensely, tried to requip a single sword. The moment her magic manifested, it collided with the chakra. The two energies, fundamentally different in nature, repelled each other like oil and water. The resulting backlash sent a shockwave through the room, throwing all three of them off their feet. This is impossible, Erza grunted, pushing herself up. My magic gives form to Ethernano stored in a pocket dimension. Your chakra comes from within you. They operate on completely different principles. Let's try a different approach, Mirajane suggested, her expression strained. Naruto, don't project your chakra, hold it within you. Erza, don't requip a weapon. Just feel the magic of your armory. I will try to use my takeover to bridge the gap, to act as a transformer between your two energies. She entered her Satan soul form. She placed one hand on Naruto's shoulder and the other on Erza's. She closed her eyes, her brow beaded with sweat. I can feel both. Your chakra is like a roaring sun. Erza's magic is like a galaxy of sharp, cold stars. I can't. They won't mix. Her demonic form flickered violently, and she cried out in pain, stumbling back, her hands smoking. The feedback was agonizing. Doubt began to creep in, a cold, insidious poison. They tried for hours. They tried dozens of different approaches. Every attempt ended in a painful, explosive failure. The synergy they had found in the heat of battle, the instinctual way they moved and fought together, meant nothing here. This was not about combat. This was about a fundamental harmony they could not find. Frustration mounted. Tempers frayed. You're not focusing, Erza. Naruto snapped after a particularly violent explosion singed his eyebrows. You're treating this like a battle plan. Trying to force the pieces to fit. And you're not listening. Erza shot back, her voice sharp with anger. You keep saying, feel the energy. That's not how my magic works. It is a science, a precise application of formula and will. It is not a vague emotion. Maybe if you let go of your precious control for 1 second, something might actually happen. And maybe if you took this seriously instead of treating it like one of your reckless improvisations, we might make some progress. Enough. Mirajane's voice, amplified by her demonic form, boomed through the chamber, shaking the very stones. She stood between them, her red eyes blazing, not with her usual cold fury, but with a desperate, pained plea. Fighting each other is what he wants. Valerius is counting on us to fail. Look at us. The prophecy said we were pillars of a new magic, and were acting like children in a sandbox. Her words struck them with the force of a physical blow. They looked at each other, seeing not their comrades, but their own frustration and fear reflected in the other's eyes. They were failing, and they were letting the pressure turn them against each other. The training session ended in a heavy, defeated silence. They had the knowledge, they had the power, but the key, the harmony that would unlock the Trinity seal, remained impossibly out of reach. Their bond, which had been forged in combat and tempered in shared moments of vulnerability, was now being tested in the crucible of their own failure, and it was beginning to crack. Just as a weary gloom settled over the guild, a tray more ran through the entire city of Magnolia. It was not an earthquake. It was a shift in reality. The sky outside the guild's windows, which had been a clear, late afternoon blue, suddenly darkened as if an eclipse had occurred. A palpable wave of cold, oppressive power washed over the city, a power that made the anomaly's previous surge feel like a gentle summer breeze. Everyone rushed outside. They looked up at the sky, their faces pale with a new, immediate terror. Floating high above the city, silhouetted against the darkened sun, was a figure. It was Valerius, but it was not. His form was draped in shadows that seemed to writhe and coil, and his eyes glowed with a violet light that was visible even from the ground. He had become a monument of stolen, void-like power. His voice descended from the heavens, not a shout, but a thought projected directly into the minds of every man, woman, and child in fury. It was a voice of utter calm, of divine authority, and of absolute, chilling conviction. People of fury, the voice of Valerius echoed in their skulls. Your age of chaos and impurity is at an end. A new dawn has come. I have taken the ultimate power, the hunger of the void, and made it my own. I am your salvation, your purification." He raised a hand, and a beam of black and purple energy shot down, striking a distant, uninhabited mountain peak on the horizon. The mountain did not explode. It simply dissolved, unwritten from existence, leaving behind a smooth, glassy crater. It was a demonstration of terrifying, absolute power. "You have 1 week," his voice continued, cold and devoid of all human emotion. "Surrender the alien, Naruto Uzumaki, to me. Renounce the false hope of your guilds and your fractured council. Accept my cleansing flame, and you will be reborn in a world of perfect order and purity. Resist, and you will be erased, just as this mountain was. The purge has begun. The choice is yours." The figure in the sky vanished. The sun returned, but the shadow of his ultimatum, of his impossible power, remained. He had not just declared war. He had declared himself a god, and had passed judgment on their entire world. The heroes stood on the street, looking up at the empty sky. The weight of their failure pressing down on them, heavier than any mountain. They had 1 week to achieve the impossible, before their world was purified into oblivion. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Trinity Seal. The final week was not a week. It was a countdown to the end of the world, and every tick of the clock was a hammer blow against the dwindling hope of fury. Valerius was a god of his word. On the 3rd day, the seaside town of Harjan, where the trio had first forged their synergy, was erased. Not destroyed, erased. One moment it was there, the next, a perfectly smooth, glassy crater steamed where the port had been, the ocean boiling at its new, unnatural shore. The news broke over the continent like a death knell. Fear, absolute and primal, became the air that people breathed. Inside the besieged fortress of the Fairy Tale Guild Hall, the atmosphere was one of quiet, desperate resolve. The laughter was gone. The brawls were a distant memory. Every member, from the S-class titans to the newest recruits, worked with a grim determination. They were no longer just a guild. They were the last bastion of a world on the brink of annihilation. In the cavernous training hall beneath the guild, failure had a taste. It tasted like ozone, sweat, and despair. Naruto, Erza, and Mirajane were bruised, exhausted, and emotionally raw. Every attempt to merge their powers had ended in a painful, violent rejection. The chasm between their fundamental natures, chakra, spatial magic, and soul transformation, seemed impossibly vast. Their synergy on the battlefield was a fleeting dance. This was an attempt to merge their very souls, and their souls refused to connect. "It's no use," Erza said, her voice raspy. She was on one knee, her armor scorched from the last backlash. "My magic is an external force I command. It is a tool. Your chakra is an internal river. I cannot merge a sword with a river. And my takeover only transforms my own spiritual essence," Mirajane added. Her Satan soul form flickering unsteadily. "Trying to use it as a bridge between you two is like trying to weave a rope from fire and ice. It just burns out." Naruto was silent, slumped against the far wall. The weight of it all was crushing him. He had been in this position before, the weight of the world on his shoulders. But then, he had been full of a righteous, defiant fire. Now, he just felt tired. He was a key that didn't fit the lock, and the door was about to be blown off its hinges. They were out of time. They had failed. It was in that moment of absolute, shared defeat that something shifted. There were no more arguments, no more frustrated strategies. There was only the quiet, profound sorrow of their failure. Naruto looked up, not at their power or their stances, but at their faces. He saw the flicker of fear in Erza's eyes, the same fear he had seen when she spoke of the Tower of Heaven. He saw the deep, weary sadness in Mirajane's expression, the sadness of a soul that had fought its own demons for too long. He wasn't looking at a knight and a demon. He was looking at his friends. The friends he had eaten cake with, fought monsters beside, and shared his deepest scars with under a sky of unfamiliar stars. The revelation that struck him was not one of power, but of purpose. "We're doing it wrong," he said, his voice quiet but clear in the echoing chamber. "We've been trying to force our powers together. Like trying to hammer 3 different kinds of metal into one sword." He stood up, his movements slow, deliberate. "But that's not what the mural showed. It wasn't one thing. It was three separate streams, flowing together, weaving into something new. He walked to the center of the room. I was wrong. I'm not the core. We don't have a core. We are three equal parts of a whole. He looked at Erza. Stop trying to command your magic. Stop thinking of it as a tool. Your armor, your swords, they're a part of you, aren't they? An extension of your will to protect. He then turned to Mirajane. And stop trying to be a bridge. Your power isn't a connector. It's a catalyst. It transforms things. It can shape the flow. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and let go of the frantic desperation that had clouded his mind. He let go of the need to control the outcome. Don't fight. Don't force. Just trust. Trust me. And trust each other. He extended his hands, not projecting power, but simply offering a connection. Erza and Mirajane looked at each other, a flicker of understanding passing between them. They stepped forward and placed their hands in his. There was no explosion, no brilliant flash of light. There was only a gentle, resonant hum. Naruto didn't push his chakra out. He let it circulate within him, a calm, steady, golden river of Sage and Kurama's energy combined. Erza, taking a shaky breath, closed her eyes and did not requip. Instead, she let the concept of her magic flow from her, the pure, untainted energy of her pocket dimension, the very essence of the sword. It was a stream of silver light. Mirajane, in turn, did not transform. She channeled the very nature of her takeover magic, the ethereal, transformative power of the soul. It manifested as a gentle, swirling current of violet. The three energies met at their joined hands. They did not collide. They did not resist. They touched, hesitated, and then, guided by a shared will born of trust and desperation, they began to flow together. The gold, the silver, and the violet. They did not merge into a single color. They wove around each other. A living braid of impossible power, a perfect, harmonious trinity. The Trinity seal was not a technique to be performed. It was a state to be achieved. And in that quiet moment, they had found it. The final battle for fury was fought on the plains before the gates of Magnolia. Valerius's army was a nightmare given form. Creatures born from the anomaly's corrupting influence, great, shambling beasts of twisted flesh and mismatched limbs, all glowing with that sickly violet light, crawled across the land. Against them stood the combined forces of Fiore's guilds. Fairy Tail was at the forefront, a chaotic, furious bulwark. Natsu's fire, Gajiel's iron, Gray's ice, they slammed into the corrupted horde. From the flanks, the mages of Lamia Scale and Blue Pegasus launched their own assaults. High above, Gildart's Clive was a one-man army, his crash magic simply disassembling anything that came near him. But it was a losing battle. For every monster they destroyed, Woe seemed to crawl from the corrupted earth. And floating serenely above it all, a calm, indifferent god in the eye of a hurricane, was Valerius. Then, they arrived. A flash of interwoven gold, silver, and violet light appeared on the battlefield. Naruto, Erza, and Mirajane stood together, their hands no longer joined, but the braided aura of the Trinity seal now flowed around them, a visible corona of their unified power. They did not look like three separate people. They looked like one being with three bodies. So, Valerius's voice echoed across the field, a hint of genuine curiosity in his tone. The fools actually managed it. A harmony of contradictions. How quaint. The trio didn't answer. They moved. And their movement was a symphony of impossible combat. When a massive beast charged them, Erza didn't requip a sword. She simply gestured, and a blade of pure, solidified golden chakra, shaped by Mirajane's soul magic, erupted from Naruto's energy field and sliced the creature in two. When a volley of corrupted energy bolts rained down on them, Naruto didn't form a Rasengan. He wove a shield of transforming demonic energy, which caught the bolts, reshaped them, and sent Hem back as a shower of cleansing silver swords. They were not just fighting together. They were together. Their thoughts, their instincts, their powers were one. They flowed across the battlefield, a seamless, unstoppable force. And where they passed, the tide of the battle turned. They weren't just destroying the monsters. They were purifying the corruption, their braided aura leaving clean, living earth in their wake. Enough. Valerius's voice boomed, no longer curious, but furious. The games were over. He descended from the sky, the full, overwhelming power of the anomaly coiling around him. He raised a hand, and reality itself began to unravel, the very laws of physics twisting to his will. The final confrontation began. It was not a battle of punches and spells. It was a war of concepts. Valerius threw waves of pure void at them, an energy that consumed all it touched. The Trinity Seal met it, not by overpowering it, but by giving it form, by using Erza's spatial concepts to contain it. Mirajan's soul magic to stabilize it, and Naruto's life energy to neutralize it. They were dismantling his godhood. He was a being of absolute power, but he was still just one will. They were three, in perfect harmony. They were a chord struck against his single, monotonous note. Impossible, he roared, as a blade of pure, soul-shaping requip magic, fueled by a Biju's chakra, slipped past his defenses and severed a tendril of darkness that connected him to the anomaly's core. I am a god. I am the will of the void. You're not a god, Naruto's voice rang out, speaking for the three of them. You're just a man who was so afraid of chaos that you became a tyrant. You were just a cage, Erza's voice added. And now, the cage is closing, Mirajan finished. They had him. He was weakened, his connection to his limitless power source severed. The raw, mindless hunger of the anomaly was now raging, untethered from his will. This was their chance. They moved into the formation from the mural. Naruto at the fore, Erza and Mirajan at his flanks. The braided aura around them intensified, coalescing in front of them, weaving into the tri-pointed knot of light, the Trinity Seal in its ultimate form. It was not a weapon of destruction. It was a lock, a key, a final, absolute statement of order against chaos. No, Valerius screamed, realizing what they intended to do. They thrust the seal forward. It did not strike Valerius. It passed through him, and struck the raging, formless heart of the anomaly's power. There was no explosion. There was a sound like a great bell being struck, a note of pure, perfect harmony that spread across the world. The ancient dimensional prison, which Valerius had shattered, reformed around the anomaly. And at its heart, bound to the very chaos he had sought to control, was Valerius. The seal did not just imprison the anomaly, it bound him to it, forcing his will to become its eternal jailer. The ultimate control freak, now bound for RNITY to the one thing he could never truly dominate. A fate worse than death. The violet light vanished from the sky. The corrupted monsters dissolved into dust. The dark clouds parted, and the true sun shone down on the battered, bleeding, but victorious plains of fury. It was over. Weeks later, a fragile peace had settled over the world. The reformed Magic Council, now led by a humbled, wiser assembly, was beginning the long process of rebuilding. And Fairy Tail was celebrating. The guild hall was a chaotic, joyous explosion of life, louder and more vibrant than ever before. In a quiet, newly rebuilt chamber beneath the council's headquarters, a different kind of marvel was taking place. Levi Magarden, working with the combined knowledge of every runesmith in Fury, had done the impossible. Before them shimmered a portal. It was an unstable, swirling vortex of color and light, but on the other side, Naruto could feel it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The unique chakra signature of his own world. A way home. He stood before it, the hum of the portal a quiet song of promise. Erza and Mirajan stood with him. The silence between them was not awkward, but filled with a universe of unspoken words. They say you can have anything you want, Erza said, her voice soft. They've offered you palaces, titles, riches, a permanent seat on the council. They'd make you king if you asked, Mirajan added, a sad smile on her face. Naruto looked from the portal to his two companions. He looked at Erza, the strong, beautiful knight who had shown him her scars, and at Mirajan, the graceful demon who had understood his own. In their eyes, he didn't see heroes or comrades. He saw the cornerstones of a life he had never expected to find. He saw a home. Everything I fought for, he said. His gaze on the portal, everyone I love, is on the other side of that door. He took a step towards it. Erza's hand clenched at her side. Mirajan looked down, hiding the tears that were gathering in her eyes. He stopped, his hand hovering just inches from the shimmering veil. He looked over his shoulder, back at them. A conflicted, pained, yet profoundly loving expression was on his face. He had spent his whole life fighting to get back to a home that was finally within his grasp. But leaving would mean losing a new one he had never known he was looking for. His heart was in two worlds. His choice, the final page of his story in this world, remained unwritten. He stood on the precipice between the life he had lost and the life he had found, a hero caught between two equally valid destinies. Chapter 10 End.